Chapter 111. Lejixi gently turned a short magic wand in her hand. This was her life weapon, made from the leg bones of a huge monster she killed when she was 18 years old. Over the years, she has been constantly tempering and using it, and it has been filled with rich magic power. As Lejixi kept turning it, you could see that the rose-red gem on the top of the magic wand also emitted a brilliant glow. She sat in the shed she had built, feeling a little bored. Thump, thump, thump. A troll acolyte ran over and said to Lejixi, "Master, that place can't be opened." Lejixi slowly raised her eyes, with a little bit of disbelief in her expression, and asked, "What do you mean? Is my prediction wrong?" The troll acolyte's face, which had turned red from running, suddenly turned blue. He immediately nodded his forehead to the ground, and his voice trembled with fear. "No, no, master, we are incompetent. We really can't find it in that place." Before the troll monk finished speaking, he saw Lejixi standing up. As she walked slowly forward, the troll monk seemed to be thrown out by some invisible pusher. A person was lifted up high and flew far away. Finally, there was a sound of bang, and the troll monk hit a mountain heavily. It was unknown whether he was still alive, but his body had knocked a huge hole in the hard mountain wall. The acolyte was firmly embedded in the hole, as if he couldn't be pulled out. Lejixi's eyes didn't look at that side at all, but just frowned and snorted softly. "Waste." Lejixi sighed again, slowly walked down the shed, and walked towards the mountain in the distance. She was sent to this place to perform a special mission, to kill a human. This mission made Lejixi very unhappy. She is the most special existence in the troll clan, the most talented magician, and the most powerful magician alive now. Magicians of her level usually don't have to perform any missions. Not to mention the mission of killing a human. It is not hundreds of years ago now. Does she need to kill a human now? This matter has already made Lejixi very unhappy, but because it is a mission assigned by the leader, she has to come. I thought it was a very simple mission, but I didn't expect that there were several special races around this place, and that human, an elf, a dwarf, and a rat man, they actually protected the human together. When Lejixi first heard the news, she suspected that her ears were broken. She didn't mention the dwarfs and the rat men, but an elf actually wanted to protect a human. Is this elf crazy? It's so embarrassing. After Lejixi knew about this, she wanted to kill this human immediately, and also kill these people who brought shame to the desolate continent. She actually went to help, no, to protect a human. Ha, this is the most ridiculous and embarrassing joke Lejixi has heard since she was born. Do ants like humans, who are as dungy as grass, need to be protected? Unbelievable. However, what made Lejixi even more unbelievable was that these people were not pretending, but were really fighting against him. It had been 17 days since he came to this place. Lejixi had already found their location, but he had not been able to kill these people. Needless to say, it must be that these monks who followed him were too useless. Such a small matter took so long. Lejixi looked back and saw some dark and light black lines in the outline in the distance. Those were the locations of Dawn's city. She really hated this place. As soon as she got close to it, she felt very uncomfortable. She decided to do it herself, quickly deal with these disgusting elves and humans, and return to the trolls' territory. Although there were many things to do there was no disgusting smell of humans everywhere. These thoughts kept popping up in Lejixi's mind, but her feet did not stop, and she walked quickly towards the location she had marked. It was a very complete mountain. Ordinary people would definitely not find anything special here, but for a great wizard like Lejixi, just standing here could feel the magical atmosphere hidden behind these mountains. Although it was very hidden, it was not difficult for Lejixi to see through it. She looked at several acolytes standing behind the suspicious mountain. No matter how hard the acolytes in front tried to open the mountain with magic, the mountain did not move at all. Lejixi felt the fire in her heart rising. How could these trolls be worse than the previous generation? They had studied in the magic school for such a long time, but they were still so useless. With a wave of her hand, the monks who were trying to pour strength into the rubble were thrown to the side and fell dizzy. Waste. Lejixi glared at them fiercely. But the monks who fell to the ground pointed behind her in shock and couldn't say a word for a long time. Lejixi was a little puzzled and slowly turned her head in the direction they pointed, wanting to see what happened to make these people so panicked. However, before Lejixi could turn around completely, she felt a gust of wind rushing towards her. The speed was so fast that Lejixi could not avoid it at all. She could only erect a thin golden barrier in front of her body in a hurry, as a last resort for her protection. Even though Lejixi's reaction was fast enough and her strength was really strong, she still fell behind in this defense. The gust of wind rushed over as if it had eyes, and hit her cheek heavily. Although Lejixi had tried her best to dodge it, and even though she had erected a barrier, that thing seemed to ignore Lejixi's reaction. The heavy merit exploded directly on Lejixi's temple, and Lejixi could not control her body at all, and fell directly to the ground. But this is not the end. The huge impact made Lejixi fall into a short coma, and the last thought in her brain was that she could not be so unprotected. However, things in the world are like this: the more you want to do something, the more you can't do it. Lejixi fainted for a very short time, and there were many monks waiting beside her, ready to fight at all times. However, no one expected that the opponent's speed was too fast. Not only was it too fast, but he seemed to have already thought about how to fight. The reactions of Lejixi, and all the monks around Lejixi were within her calculations, and they had no power to fight back. The person who came was He Huan. It could only be He Huan. Ming Zhao unlocked the seal, and He Huan was already standing at the entrance of the cave, waiting for her opportunity. Although she could no longer see any special prompts in her vision at this time, she found that her perception ability had increased by more than 10 times. Even if she was standing inside this heavy mountain, she could still feel the magic flowing outside the mountain. They came from different people. Among these magic flows, there was a special difference, especially the big and strong one. He Huan asked Ming Zhao who this person was, and Ming Zhao's answer surprised He Huan. She is Lejixi. Ming Zhao sat on the ground, breathing heavily. He had just overdrawn his magic power, and fell into a short period of stiffness. He Huan gave him a few bottles of magic potions, and he was able to repair a lot of his exhausted magic power. However, even so, he was still in a relatively weak state. If the other party was not Lejixi, Ming Zhao would not have to go through so much trouble. Lejixi was the most powerful and talented magician in the troll race. She was less than 60 years old. Among the trolls, who were often hundreds of years old, this age was just a short time after they became adults. Lejixi is not only strong, but also has different ideas from ordinary people. She doesn't like the balanced development of ordinary magicians. She likes to pursue the ultimate strength, so she has developed all the abilities of her body, and used them all to support magic. In this way, her magic strength has been improved by more than one level, but correspondingly, Lejixi's body is very weak. It is the kind of weakness that ordinary people can kill at will. However, Lejixi also considers her situation. She has various props on her body, so that others cannot easily touch her, and even if they touch her, it will not be so easy to kill her. When Ming Zhao knew that his opponent was Lejixi, he was actually quite desperate. After all, facing such a genius, failure was almost inevitable. However, when he was describing Lejixi, He Huan was thinking about another thing in her mind. She remembered that she had obtained a pair of glasses in the secret realm, which could directly see through the weaknesses of other creatures. It was very useful. It was also because of this pair of glasses that she was able to greatly weaken the Taishan Guild. The glasses were Lejixi's glasses, but they were just disguised. When He Huan left the secret realm, the glasses had disappeared. At that time, He Huan was still thinking about when she must find the original version of the glasses. Unexpectedly, this wish came true again in such an incredible way. She is very strong, you must be careful. After Ming Zhao finished telling all the information he knew about Lejixi, he still felt uneasy, so he gave He Huan detailed instructions. He Huan nodded. She is very strong. He Huan knows this better than anyone else, but now she knows that she is even stronger. That day outside the Dawn City, that little light penetrated into her body and stimulated more abilities in her body. However, from that day to now, He Huan has been in a coma, and even she herself does not know what her current strength is. How strong is she? Lejixi came at the right time. Now He Huan needs a strong opponent. Chapter 112. Lejixi is a mage. A very powerful mage. After He Huan came to the Dark Night world, he actually didn't fight against mages many times, mainly because, among orcs and humans, mages are relatively rare. In the words of the people on the desolate continent, only high-level races like trolls and elves can produce a large number of people who can control magic, and humans and orcs are born without a connection with nature, so it is inevitable that there are few mages among them. Moreover, even if mages appear, their strength is limited. This argument also leads to the fact that He Huan can only meet a few mages, and even fewer mages who can fight against them. Under such circumstances, if He Huan fights against the most powerful high-level mage Lejixi right at the beginning of the battle, the result will be difficult to predict. This is what Ming Zhao is worried about, but it is not what He Huan is worried about. Although He Huan has rarely fought against mages, he knows Baheo and Ming Zhao very well. Putting aside their personal fighting habits, He Huan feels that he can still get a glimpse of the mage profession from them. Combined with Ming Zhao's description of Lejix's situation, He-Wan already had a rough idea of the battle with Lejixi in his mind. Magicians are good at long-range attacks. As long as they are far away from them, their abilities can be greatly improved. However, when facing close-range attacks, in order to save their lives, they have to spend part of their skill attack power to defend, which will also cause their attack rhythm to be interrupted. Therefore, from the moment he understood Lejixi, He-Wan had already made the most direct and simple battle plan for this magician. That is a quick and close-range close combat. It must be said that He-Wan's tactics were very successful. Lejixi has been at the top for too long, and her chance of winning is too high. Such strength makes her proud, and makes her feel invincible. Under such circumstances, He-Wan's appearance was not taken seriously by Lejixi at all, and her contempt caused her to suffer the first heavy blow from He-Wan. And in this heavy blow, He-Wan did not hide any strength, and almost released his greatest strength. Not surprisingly, Lejixi was knocked down. Not only was she not knocked down, she also fell into a very short coma. And the monks surrounding Lejixi were also in a state of shock. The strongest wizard of the trolls, no, it should be the strongest wizard in the desolate continent, was actually knocked down. The shock of this incident was even greater than the trolls being knocked down by the orcs. They were shocked in place, and there was no reaction for a long time. It was during this gap that He-Wan's attack once again came upon Lejixi. He-Wan pressed heavily on Lejixi, and the face of the strongest troll mage was imprinted in He-Wan's eyes. She wore gorgeous ornaments on her head, and 2 huge fangs protruded from her mouth, and even the fangs were inlaid with huge gems. However, these things were not what attracted He-Wan's attention. She saw the monocle on Lejixi's face at a glance. They were so close, and Lejixi was in a coma without resistance, so He-Wan did not take off his pants to fart and use any plucking feathers from a passing goose. Instead of such a skill, he stretched out his hand, and took off the monocle hanging on Lejixi's face, and put it on his own face. As expected, this thing is what He-Wan has been thinking about for a long time. Before putting it on, He-Wan was still worried that this genuine product was different from the counterfeit. After all, for He-Wan, the most important function of this pair of glasses is to be able to see the vital points of all targets. If this genuine product does not have this function, even if it has many other functions and attributes, it will not be of much help to He-Wan. Fortunately, the counterfeit forged the core function of the glasses. After putting on the genuine product, He-Wan immediately saw all the conditions of Lejixi under his body, and even under the glasses, the priority of the weaknesses was clearly marked. It can be seen that Lejixi was able to win every battle. In addition to his own strong strength, this glasses is also a very important reason. In addition, under this pair of glasses, He-Wan can also see how many important materials and equipment the target has, and even what special parts of the target can be used as production materials. For example, the Lejixi that He-Wan saw now, her body was full of defensive weaknesses, but each weakness was covered with a high-level prop, almost wrapping Lejixi into a hard hedgehog. The reason why He-Wan was able to knock Lejixi down in one go was because the target of his attack was her face. Lejixi was wearing these glasses on her face, but these glasses had almost no defensive ability, which made Lejixi's face the only exposed weakness on her entire body. He-Wan raised his fist without hesitation, and smashed it towards Lejixi's face again and again. Not only that, He-Wan also took away a special item from Lejixi's body during each attack. He-Wan was very fast, whether it was the speed of punching or the speed of obtaining equipment and items. In just a blink of an eye, the jewels on Lejixi's body had been taken away. It was at this time that the dazed monks finally reacted. They shouted and began to prepare to fight back. Some of the monks were healing, and they were ready to restore Lejixi's health. Lejixi finally woke up when she was hit by numerous severe pains. She opened her eyes, but before she could open them completely, she was hit hard in the face again. This punch was more severe than the previous one, because He-Wan had just taken off the steel spike gloves covering Lejixi's fist, and put them on his own hand. This punch was not flesh against flesh, but steel spikes against flesh. When He-Wan hammered down, he heard a low cracking sound, which was the sound of Lejixi's bones being pierced. At this time, Lejixi was completely in a coma. He-Wan did not expect that his battle with the first magician of the desolate continent would start and end in such a situation. During the whole battle, Lejixi never resisted except for opening a protective shield at the beginning. Although He-Wan's right arm was injured and bleeding from the counter-injury on the protective shield, He-Wan quickly regained the advantage in the subsequent battle with Lejixi. It was also during this process that He-Wan realized how powerful this Lejixi was. As each of her props was taken off, the damage she suffered became greater and greater. One couldn't even imagine how abnormal the magic power of a magician with such a fragile body would be accumulated to. Fortunately, she fainted, and fortunately, he could attack her in close combat, otherwise, One didn't know how difficult this battle would be. With such a relief, One didn't dare to show mercy to Lejixi, and the attack became heavier and heavier, especially after she put on the full set of weapons, and saw many small holes drilled on Lejixi's head. Blood immediately flowed out of those small holes. One was not satisfied and continued to hit her head at a very fast speed. In just a few seconds, Lejixi's head had been beaten into a sieve by One, and her life disappeared silently. After confirming that Lejixi was dead, One did not stay in this place at all. She stood up and rushed towards the most densely packed acolytes. While running, a huge sickle appeared in her hand out of thin air. The blade of the sickle was still flashing with strange golden light, and One swung it in the air, making a whirring sound. The sound of the wind soon formed small tornadoes in the air, and these tornadoes immediately swam in all directions as soon as they landed. Its route was curved, and all targets passing through this route would be cut by the sharpness of the tornado. More importantly, there was not just one tornado like this, but as One kept waving the huge sickle in his hand, tornadoes kept flying out. In a short time, the tornadoes of all sizes had spread all over the area. One herself waved the huge sickle towards the acolytes. She was so fast that the huge sickle almost extended her arm, leaving no grass wherever she went. As for the acolytes that the sickle hit, they could not even breathe for 2 breaths before they turned into a pool of blood and fell to the ground. The acolytes were not fools, and they did not have to keep fighting here. Especially after Lejixi died, all the acolytes were already terrified. You have to know that it was Lejixi, the most powerful magician on the desolate continent, a peak they could not reach. Such a Lejixi died at the hands of this human. How could they compete? Now that One's sickle was swung, the people attacked would have only one way to go, and there was only one way to go. The acolytes did not dislike living too long, and almost immediately turned around and ran away, and they ran very fast. The acolytes who ran slower were either killed directly by One's sickle or swept to death by those large and small tornadoes. Only by running fast enough can you have a chance to survive. So, in a very short time, there was no one left on the edge of the mountain wall that was just crowded with people. One did not chase them. Compared with destroying these little bastards, One was more concerned about the things on Lejixi's body. This first magician in the desolate continent is a walking treasure house. If he doesn't take all these things away, One will feel that he has lost a lot. One returned to the side of Lejixi's body, but found that Lejixi's body was trembling slightly, as if there were signs of resurrection. Resurrection? How could One let this happen? She raised the sickle in her hand without hesitation and chopped it down. Chapter 113. Lejixi is really a treasure. The various items he found on her body were enough to satisfy One. One even felt that he had gone from poverty to wealth. There were many things in her backpack that One could not even imagine. You should know that before this, the races that One had come into contact with, and the people she defeated were basically hyenas, ratmen, molemen, centaurs, and other races. They were all the poorest orcs without exception. Lejixi was the first troll One had come into contact with, and she was such a high-level troll, such a rich troll. Looking at these things, One felt that she had been corrupted by money. Well, she liked being corrupted. The feeling of being corrupted by money was really happy. One was slowly packing up Lejixi's body, as well as all her inheritance, and also wanted her treasure house key, but this treasure house should be in the main city of the trolls. One looked at the key that looked so colorful, and she could guess how many good things were in the treasure house, but she only took a look at it, and put it in the corner of her backpack. She couldn't be proud just because she killed Lejixi. She knew clearly that she killed Lejixi today because of the right time, right place, and right people. The outcome would be different if she killed Lejixi the second time. So, it was only a thought to go to the troll main city alone to steal the legacy of Lejixi's treasury. It was unlikely to be achieved, at least not in the near future. At this time, One suddenly heard a few exclamations. It was Kay's voice. His mechanical legs made a clicking sound when walking on the uneven ground. One looked back at him and saw Kay staring at the empty woods and the edge of the mountain with wide eyes, asking in disbelief, "Where are the people? Where are the trolls? Where did they go?" Following behind Kay was Big Teeth. Because of his height, Big Teeth was able to help Ming Zhao up, and the two of them stood at the entrance of the cave. As Kay explained, Ming Zhao and Big Teeth also discovered the empty space nearby, and they both showed shocked expressions on their faces. "Where are the people? Where are all the trolls? Where are all the trolls? Where did they go?" Kay opened his hands and waved them, expressing his shock. Dead. At this time, He Huan finally plundered all of Lejixi. She stood up and gently kicked Lejixi's body with her legs. In her hand, she was playing with a gray ring. This ring was the resurrection ring, which was just taken off Lejixi's finger. As the name suggests, the only function of this ring is to revive the wearer within 5 minutes after the wearer dies. However, when the wearer is resurrected, he will only have 1/10 of his health, and his injuries will not heal. The wearer must rely on himself to recover and heal his injuries. According to the battle situation in the desolate continent, even if the dead people have no particularly exaggerated wounds on their bodies. Therefore, even if he is resurrected with only 1/10 of his health, it is not difficult to recover with the wound medicine he carries with him. But this time, Lejixi was an exception. She had no wounds on her body. Her wounds were all on her head. Her entire head had turned into a pool of mud under He Huan's hard hammering. Even if she was resurrected with 1/10 of her life, it would be impossible to heal her head in a short time. Moreover, He Huan quickly returned to defense. Seeing the resurrected Lejixi, he naturally sent her away again. Although the resurrection ring can revive the wearer, it cannot be used continuously. Each use has a 3-day charging time. That is to say, if the wearer dies again during the charging period, there is really nothing that can be done. Unfortunately, Lejixi is one of them. So, this time, Lejixi, the first mage in the desolate continent, died and couldn't die anymore. He Huan played with the resurrection ring in his hand, looked at the empty forest around him, and pulled the corner of his mouth. The rest, run away. Listening to He Huan's understated tone, Ming Zhao and others' eyes were already fixed on the corpse lying at He Huan's feet, and the bodies of many acolytes lying on the ground in the forest. Their jaws dropped. You have to know that in the past 10 days, the 3 of them were exhausted by these endless acolytes. How long has He Huan been out, and they are already dead? Ran away? Why is this so unrealistic? There are more unrealistic things, and there is also. Ming Zhao's eyes finally fell on the corpse at He Huan's feet. This is a troll corpse, and it is a female troll corpse, but her face has been beaten to pieces, and it is completely unrecognizable. However, from the clothes on her body, and the magic particles left around her body, Ming Zhao had a bold idea in his mind. No way, no way. This idea was too bold, so bold that Ming Zhao himself found it unbelievable. But his mouth opened faster than his mouth, and he asked, "Is this body Lejixi?" Ming Zhao's question immediately attracted the attention of Kay and Debanya. Although they did not speak, their eyes revealed all their thoughts. Lejixi? Are you not sick? How could it be Lejixi? That was the #1 mage in the desolate continent. You told me that Lejixi was beaten to death in just a few minutes, and so many acolytes died? Are you kidding us? If that's the case, what's the point of their hard work in the past 10 days? It's just a joke. But He Huan's equally relaxed voice came again. Yeah. Kay and Big Teeth turned their heads around immediately. They stared at He Huan again, their pupils shaking. Their shock was completely beyond words. He Huan was curious. He had beaten Lejixi's head like this, but Ming Zhao could still recognize her. When Ming Zhao heard He Huan's admission, he was shocked and speechless, but he soon accepted it. Killing Lejixi in such a short time might be an exaggeration or an impossible miracle for others, but it was not surprising for He Huan. Ming Zhao laughed, but before he could say anything, he saw He Huan throwing something at him. Ming Zhao subconsciously raised his hand to catch the thing. When he opened his palm, he saw a blue hourglass pendant. This thing immediately made Ming Zhao's eyes widen. This is a magic hourglass. As long as you wear this thing, the magic power of the mage will be like the time flowing through the hourglass, and it will never run out. For a magician, this thing can be said to be a perpetual motion machine. Ming Zhao has always known the existence of this thing since he became a magician, but this thing is not something that ordinary people can dream of. It is said that this pendant was made by an ancient wizard. There are only 5 in the entire desolate continent, belonging to 5 high-level wizards. However, decades ago, Lejixi challenged the 5 high-level wizards and collected all 5 magic hourglasses in her hands. What's more terrifying is that in order to ensure the preciousness and uniqueness of this magic hourglass, this woman even destroyed 4 of them. In the end, there was only this one magic hourglass left in the world. From that time on, the magic hourglass became a legend on the desolate continent and was kept by Lejixi. No other wizard could get his hands on it. However, such a mythical artifact now lay quietly in his palm. If he said he was not excited, it would be too hypocritical. However, He Huan Mingxin did not know the preciousness of this thing, so Ming Zhao could not accept it rashly, so he asked He Huan, Do you know what this thing is? He Huan said, it is something suitable for mages. Ming Zhao pursed his lips, thought for a few seconds, and told He Huan the origin of this thing, and finally said, this thing is a very precious artifact. It is not appropriate for you to give it to me. He Huan waved his hand and interrupted him before he finished speaking. Any artifact can only be called an artifact if it is placed in the hands of the right person. If it is given to the wrong person, it is a waste. He Huan patted Ming Zhao on the shoulder and said, you just gave these things too many properties that have nothing to do with it. In fact, it is just a pendant, a prop for a mage. Outside of this scope, the rest is useless nonsense. Ming Zhao's eyes suddenly shook, and he seemed to finally figure out something at this moment. Kay and Debanya also squatted beside Lejix's body for a long time, and finally confirmed that He Huan was not joking. The body on the ground that looked so rotten that it could not be seen from its original appearance was really the first magician on the desolate continent. The two of them raised their heads, looking at each other, and their eyes showed expressions of relief. Fortunately, they did not leave He Huan to escape for their lives after he fainted, no matter what the reason was, otherwise now. Oh, I can't think about it. I dare not think about it. However, He Huan no longer cared about the inner thoughts of the three people. She clapped her hands and successfully attracted the attention of several people. He Huan asked, okay, what I want to know now is another thing. The three people immediately looked at He Huan intently, even holding their breath, for fear that their breathing would disturb He Huan's questioning. What happened in the more than 10 days since I fainted? Chapter 114. After the earthquake in Dawn City, no one knew what had triggered it. The orcs, who had not cared much about the destruction of the hyena man's dog barking city, suddenly took action. Because they had flying mounts, it only took a few hours for the army to get from the Cape of Chance to Dog Barking City, which was also the City of Dignity. Then the following events were very logical. The orcs have been in this world for many years. Although the trolls and elves did not recognize them at first, their fighting power was too high. Even the humans at that time were destroyed by them. Therefore, it was not difficult for them to attack the City of Dignity. It is said that the Dignity City was breached in just one day, and countless humans inside were killed and injured. When Ming Zhao said this, Kay suddenly interrupted, be objective, there are not so many. Isn't there a rumor that some humans have escaped? Some did escape, but no one knows how many. Among the 4 of them, 3 of them had no intention of dealing with humans, so naturally all the news was hearsay. He Huan roughly knew the whole story from their mouths, and couldn't help but frown. According to He Huan's idea, their current human cohesion is not good, their combat effectiveness is not good, and their supply is not good, so the best way is to develop slowly, first take a few cities in hand, and then slowly confront the orcs. But she never expected that the orcs would react so quickly, and not give Dignity City such a chance at all. This made her a little bit of a toothache. It was not a good idea to think so by herself. The best way was to contact the people in Dignity City. She thought that according to Ming Zhao and others, so many people died in Dignity City, and there might be very few living forces left. I don't know if Fu Rong is still alive, and Tian Maiduo and Fu Yi. When she left Dignity City, Fu Yi and the others had already arrived and must have participated in this battle. He Huan had prepared for the worst, but she didn't expect that she had just contacted Fu Rong, and Fu Rong's reply appeared almost immediately. He Huan, are you still alive? Although He Huan couldn't see Fu Rong's expression, she could tell how surprised Fu Rong was from the sound of this sentence. It's just, who told you I was dead? No one told me, but since you left, we have been trying to contact you and your messages have been unresponsive. It's been so many days, so we all thought you were dead. How are you doing now? He Huan thought that maybe he was in a coma and couldn't respond, so Fu Rong and the others got such a response. However, whether it was He Huan or Fu Rong, they were not most concerned about these trivial matters. Not too good. Fu Rong sighed deeply and told He Huan about their current situation. The news Ming Zhao and his team received was not wrong, but not entirely correct. Dignity City was indeed penetrated by the orcs, but it was not a one-sided defeat for humans as they had reported. On the contrary, because when He Huan left, humans had actually established a production line for thermal weapons, so the orcs did not gain any advantage during the battle. Finally, because they really didn't have the raw materials for gunpowder, they couldn't make hot weapons, and the defeat slowly showed up. However, before that, Fu Rong and Tian Maiduo had already made the decision to retreat. They collected the most important production lines, and escorted this group of people out of Dignity City first. The rest of the people kept fighting with them to confuse the orcs, and only withdrew from Dignity City at the last moment. Of course, there were casualties, but not as exaggerated as the orcs had advertised. Where are you now? He Huan heard from Fu Rong that they were now together with Tian Maiduo's people. In fact, it was not just them, there were more, such as the teams led by the presidents who had come to join them. In other words, there were a considerable number of humans on Fu Rong's side. It was very difficult to hide so many people, and this was what He Huan wanted to know most. Where were these people now? We are now distributed in the valley. Fu Rong mentioned a place, and He Huan looked for it according to his map, and found that the location was very clever. It is a mountain range at the junction of the orc and troll territories, and there is a wilderness where dragons live near this mountain range. In short, this place is very dangerous, but from another perspective, it is also very safe and good for recuperation. But it is not a good place to develop here and prepare for another battle. Moreover, this place is short of supplies. If they continue to live here, they will starve to death in a short time without waiting for the orcs to attack them. Your location is not very good. He Huan looked at the map and made an objective evaluation. Fu Rong also knew that, she sighed, there is no way, this is the best place we can find for the time being. You know, we have too many wounded soldiers now, and the healing profession is not enough, so we can only take care of them for a few days. At this point, Fu Rong also asked about He Huan's situation. Where are you now? I'm near Liming City now. He Huan looked at her location, which was actually on the edge of a cliff in a forest outside Liming City. She slid her finger on the map and suddenly found that the straight line distance from where Fu Rong and the others were to Liming City was actually very close, but... Liming City? What is that place? Fu Rong had never heard of this name before, so she asked, but before He Huan could answer her, Tian Maiduo over there answered her. It can be seen that when He Huan's contact came, it actually attracted the attention of everyone in the parliament, and they all gathered around. After a brief understanding of the history of Dawn City, Fu Rong said, Is that place safe? He Huan thought about what happened in the past 2 days. Not too dangerous. Although He Huan did not mention what Ming Zhao and others had encountered in the past few days, or what happened to him, it can be seen that a place that can make someone like He Huan say not too dangerous is not very comfortable. Even when He Huan mentioned this place, Fu Rong had already imagined a big drama in her mind. What should we do now? Fu Rong exhaled a breath of depression, lit a cigarette, and blew out white smoke rings from her mouth one by one. She didn't want to tell He Huan that these days, she thought there was no hope. If you are asking me personally, then I will definitely answer you that I will not suffer any loss. If someone makes me unhappy, then I will definitely make him unhappy. He Huan leaned against a big tree, slowly looking at the map on her knees. Kay beside her also came over to look at the map. Even Ming Zhao and Abanya leaned over to look at the map that they got from Gangya Mansion. Maps are not rare things for humans in the old times, but in the desolate continent, they are very rare things for any race. But as a member of the parliament of a race, I can't make this decision. What do you think? Fu Rong, of course we have to fight back. This is not about humiliation or not, but if we don't fight back, I'm afraid it will be very difficult for us to survive. Fu Rong's words are not exaggerated at all. The place they are in now is also very scary. If they are not careful, they will be discovered by patrolling orcs. I am near Dawn City now. I will go and see if Dawn City can still be used after the earthquake. If it can be used, you can find a way to come here. He Huan's finger was still drawing a line between Fu Rong's position and Liming City. Your position is very close to my position in a straight line, but if you want to come here, it will take some effort. You need to take a detour, and the detour is quite far. Before He Huan finished speaking, Kay, who was sitting next to her, suddenly said, Why do you need to take a detour? There is a tunnel at their location that can lead directly to Liming City. Kay's words immediately attracted He Huan's attention to him. How do you know there is a tunnel here? I've been here for many years. I know where every stone is in Dawn City, not to mention every tunnel. Kay proudly popped out his chest to highlight his status as a local boss. Why didn't you tell me at the beginning? Didn't you ask? Kay answered confidently. Okay. This is good news, at least it sounds like good news now. When Fu Rong and the others heard about this, they were almost immediately excited. You know, they are trapped in this place and are almost desperate. No one wants to stay in this state, where they can be found by the god of death at any time. Now they suddenly know that the road to heaven is right next to them. What news can be better than this? In this excitement, Fu Rong still retains a little rationality. She said, Don't be happy too early. After all, there was an earthquake in Liming City. I don't know if the tunnel will still exist. Unfortunately, these people were too excited and didn't hear Fu Rong's voice at all. In fact, It turns out that Fu Rong's worry is extremely necessary and correct. He once stood inside the tunnel. This is the middle section of the entire tunnel. The earthquake in Dawn City caused a small section of this place to collapse, which blocked the tunnel tightly. Looking at the tightly blocked tunnel, He-Wan asked Kay, "What should we do now?" Chapter 115. Kay was shocked. "How can you ask me about this? What do I, a weak dwarf who can't take care of myself, know? Under normal circumstances, don't you always command Ming Zhao the elf around? Why are you asking me now? Oh, it turns out that it's because of the curse of Dawn City that Davanya and Ming Zhao can't come here, right? So now I'm the one who has to run errands and work like a slave, right?" In just such a short moment, countless thoughts flashed through Kay's mind, but in the face of He-Wan's smiling eyes, he finally just touched his nose and resignedly took out something from his backpack. It was a black Rubik's Cube-sized box. In the dark tunnel, He-Wan could not clearly see what it was. However, when Kay put it on the ground, a small green light lit up on the black Rubik's Cube. Before He-Wan could observe it carefully, he saw that the black Rubik's Cube changed its shape like a transformer. In just a few seconds, the black Rubik's Cube turned into an engineering vehicle. Although it was not a large engineering vehicle, it was enough to fit in this tunnel. He-Wan was quite surprised. You know, in the old days, she liked this kind of transforming robot when watching movies. Now, when this machine suddenly appeared in front of her, she was still shocked. Kate probably noticed He-Wan's surprise. He began to mumble, as if explaining himself. "I explore Dawn City alone, and I always encounter many unexpected situations, so it is normal to have more equipment. Can it transform into a human?" He-Wan was completely fascinated by this transformable engineering vehicle. She asked. "Of course not. It can only be used for the simplest engineering work." Kay's voice rose a little. "Making a robot is the most difficult of all machine making. Among the entire dwarf race, only the deceased master craftsman Mel can do it." Okay. He-Wan had to listen to a long story about the past of the dwarfs just because of this sentence. It was also at this time that He-Wan finally understood how the dwarves came. In the hundreds of years since the original inhabitants of the desolate continent disappeared, many groups of humans were summoned to this world. The dwarves were one of them, and they came relatively early. When they arrived, their old era was just when the mechanical age began to develop rapidly. Naturally, they brought the technology of the time with them, giving the original inhabitants of the desolate continent a small shock. It was because of their small shock that the trolls and elves at that time felt that their authority had been challenged unprecedentedly, so they began to slaughter them. In the end, the dwarves hid in the power of the orcs, and only then did they retain the last small population. They simply joined the orcs, and have been together until now. Unfortunately, too many dwarves died at that time, and the remaining dwarves only produced a great craftsman after many years, that is, Mel. Mel invented many things, and gained a lot of fame among the orcs with these mechanical things. He also stood firm among the orcs, and taught many students. In this way, the dwarves became famous in the desolate continent. However, although the orcs accepted the dwarves as their own race, there was still a gap between them in terms of origin. Therefore, in the free land, the dwarves can be regarded as the second orc race with the least popularity. Until now, the dwarves' machinery has not developed very well, and the things they invented can basically not be used in combat, so their status in the free land is not as good as before, and many dwarfs are so poor that they can't even get enough food. But the dwarfs are all obsessed with machinery. There is no other way. In order to support themselves, many dwarfs began to take some private jobs. Kay is one of them. He found gunpowder, and made flares and fireworks with gunpowder. He also sold raw materials. Of course, he also secretly sold some muskets to some races, who were interested in trying. For example, the musket that He-Wan got from Hei Shou was actually made by Kay. Later, he also did business with Duoli. According to the time, he should have delivered the goods to Duoli. However, he met He-Wan, Davanya, Earthquake and Lejixi, which meant that he could not do this business with Duoli. Now his goods were robbed by He-Wan, and he even signed a humiliating treaty. Kay felt that he was the most miserable among all the dwarfs. Now I have to help He-Wan dig a tunnel here. He-Wan listened to Kay's mumbling and couldn't help but twitching his mouth. "If you can keep supplying me with the raw materials for gunpowder, I can guarantee that you will have enough to eat, and I will pay you." This was the first time He-Wan made a serious and positive promise to Kay. Kay's eyes lit up when he heard it. If such mumbling could make He-Wan promise him, he would have muttered it in her ear a long time ago. Kay was directing his engineering vehicle and working very hard. He-Wan continued to make big promises without any change in his expression. Of course, If you can provide me with more help, I am not the kind of ungrateful person. I will make sure you have enough food and clothing, and you and your people can get a piece of land of your own in Dawn City. Really? Kay's eyes lit up even brighter after hearing this, like small light bulbs in the dark tunnel. You have to know that since the dwarves came to this world, they have been homeless, and have been constantly expelled and slaughtered by trolls and elves. Even if they were able to gain a foothold in the last free land, the land in their city was rented to them by the orcs. Orcs are a shameless race. They come to collect rent every year on time. If they can't pay the rent, they will send an army to drive them all out without hesitation. Just like the trolls and elves drove out the humans, and just like the orcs destroyed Dignity City. If I can get a piece of land in Dawn City. That's Dawn City. Kay has been wandering around Dawn City in the past few years. Of course, he knows how big Dawn City is. A piece of land here. I can't think about it. When I think about it, even my whole body starts to tremble with excitement. Of course it's true. As long as we can take over Dawn City, and defeat the orcs and other disobedient races, then anything is possible. He-Wan looked at Kay's excited hands that were already showing after images when he was using the controller, curled his lips, and continued to increase the stakes with a malicious heart. It's not impossible to even help you study this thing. He-Wan took out the rocket launcher, put it on the ground, and patted it gently. Kay was so greedy that he wanted to come over and take a closer look, but He-Wan immediately put his eyes away and raised her chin to signal Kay not to stop working. Kay was so excited that he even took out 3 more black Rubik's Cubes and put them on the ground, and transformed them into 3 engineering vehicles to start working together. He-Wan saw this and drew a few more big cakes in a row, but Kay was so excited that he wanted to fly, but he didn't take out anything else. He-Wan knew that he had nothing. In this way, under the full force of the excited Kay, the block passage was dug out in just over 10 hours. Continue to walk inside. Although there are still many uneven places in this passage that are sunken and raised due to the earthquake, it is much better than the blockage just now. The two walked in the underground passage for about 4 or 5 hours, and finally saw another blockage. However, this blockage was not silent, but someone could clearly hear someone digging on the other side of the blockage. There was no doubt that this must be Fu Rong's team. Kay released his 4 engineering vehicles again, and both sides worked together. This time, the time used was much shorter. After only an hour or so, the blockage was cleared. Although they had expected that He-Wan was digging on the other side of the blockage, Fu Rong and Tian Maiduo could not help but cheer when they heard He-Wan's voice coming from the other side. If it were not for the fact that they could not make too loud noises in this shaky tunnel, the cheers in the entire tunnel would have been earth-shattering. Fu Rong was the first to crawl through the blocked gap. As soon as she poked her head out, she saw He-Wan standing in the aisle on the other side. She was still the same as always, with a faint, confident smile on her face, but Fu Rong always felt that something was different about He-Wan, but she couldn't tell what it was. He-Wan said, "We meet again." It was just the most ordinary sentence, but Fu Rong didn't know why her eyes suddenly became hot. Obviously, she was a very rational person and didn't have many emotions, but after seeing He-Wan and hearing her voice, she couldn't help but feel some emotion surging in her heart. He-Wan and Fu Rong hugged each other. They said nothing, but at this moment, they seemed to have said a lot. At the end, Fu Rong raised her head and smiled. "Yes, we meet again." Following Fu Rong, Fu Yi and Tian Maiduo came down, but they didn't have the nerve to hug He-Wan again. He-Wan looked at them with a sharp gaze, and she asked, "Are you all okay?" There was a scar on Tian Maiduo's face, and it can be seen that they fought hard in the Battle of Dignity City. Not bad, the survival rate of healing professions is 90%. Fu Yi also said, the survival rate of melee and ranged combat professions is over 80%. Fu Rong followed their words and explained the situation on her side to He-Wan. All production lines are saved, and the engineers are alive. The survival rate of logistics personnel is over 80%. As long as there is a suitable site, production can be resumed immediately. It's just... Fu Rong moved her mouth, but didn't say the last word, but there were no raw materials. But He-Wan also smiled. The raw materials for gunpowder are in place. Before he finished speaking, everyone's eyes lit up. This time, we have to take back what we deserve. Chapter 116. After the experience of the last time in Dignity City, everyone in Dawn City was quite low-key. He-Wan stood at the entrance of the tunnel in the valley of the Boundary Mountain, and watched the last human enter the secret passage. She then lit the bomb in her hand, and threw it into the hole of the secret passage. A few seconds later, the entrance of the secret passage, which was not big to begin with, completely collapsed under the bombing of the bomb. He Huan then rode on the Flying Fox, crossed the Boundary Mountain, and headed towards Dawn City. Dawn City was the original human city, and it has been abandoned for 300 years. Fortunately, the entire city of Dawn City is built on solid rock, so even after 300 years, it has not become an unusable ruin. On the contrary, the various plants growing in the city make Dawn City more concealed. When He Huan arrived at Dawn City, it was just the quiet night. In every city, there is a city core, which is an important existence that allows the city to resist the night. If it were an ordinary city, the core would be destroyed the moment the city was destroyed. However, Dawn City is the main city of one of the oldest races on the desolate continent, and its city core is not comparable to a small country city like Dog Barking City. Although more than 300 years have passed, the city core of Dawn City is still running regularly, providing important protection for the city. For this reason, when K opened his own test field in Dawn City, he was not affected by the night. At most, he was chased by human snakes and ran around everywhere. Speaking of human snakes, the last time He Huan came to Dawn City, he happened to have a conflict with human snakes. He Huan and K lured the human snakes into the underground test site and buried them. This time, He Huan came back and asked people to go down to check. Finally, it was confirmed that the human snakes were dead. In particular, Chung Huang Chunai followed him down. When she came back, she directly peeled off the skins of these 20 or 30 human snakes. Human snakes are different from orcs. They are failures when they are synthesized. They have no human emotions at all. Instead, they are superimposed with the cold-bloodedness and viciousness of snakes. Therefore, they are more ferocious than ordinary beasts. In order to protect their ferocity and strong fighting power, the snake's skin on their bodies is a hard material second only to dragon skin, and is an excellent raw material for making armor. The only pity is that the reproductive capacity of human snakes is very low, and they cannot leave the scope of Dawn City. When they are hungry, they will even eat their own kind, so that after so many years, human snakes living in Dawn City are still very rare. Apart from the dead batch, there are not many human snakes left in Dawn City, and they are handed over to Fu Yi and several presidents with higher fighting power to deal with. Others were more concerned with cleaning up Dawn City in a short time. In fact, He Huan rarely stayed in the camp or the city, so she didn't know much about the life of the players in the city. This time, she entered Ryan Dawn City with the human army, and found out a lot of things that she didn't know much about. For example, just cleaning up the old city, He Huan found that it was not quite what she thought. In He Huan's mind, the so-called cleaning is just picking up stones, cutting down plants, and cleaning up. But in fact, in the city, most people now not only do the simplest and most basic work that He Huan thought, but have even repaired some collapsed buildings and leveled a lot of land for factories. As for the military factory that He Huan cares about most, Fu Rong and his team arranged it underground, thanks to K's guidance. This K is worthy of being a person who has been wandering in Liming City for so many years. Under his guidance, Fu Rong and his team quickly found a hidden and spacious place in Liming City that is suitable for a military factory. However, K was also able to enter the military factory to study. After He Huan handed over all the raw materials he got from K to Fu Rong and others, the military factory production line, which had been stagnant for many days, started moving again. Everything in the entire Dawn City started moving, and everyone's face was once again full of hope. It seemed that this time, stability and security were finally ushered in, and everyone was no longer wandering. Of course, no one would really naively think that this kind of peace could last for a long time, but no one expected that disputes would come so soon. On the third day after humans entered Dawn City, when Tian Maiduo came to He Huan and Fu Rong to discuss what to do next, a great pigeon flew in from the stone window and landed right in front of He Huan. The relaxed and warm atmosphere just now froze in an instant because of the arrival of the pigeon. Tian Maiduo and Fu Rong stared at the pigeon with their eyes, and He Huan only looked at the pigeon for a while before opening the copper pipe tied to its feet. In the Dark Night world, only humans from the old world can use everything similar to the game functions, but the natives in the Dark Night world can only abide by everything in this world. The copper tube was written with a message sent by Ming Zhao from the Black Forest. There was only one sentence. The trolls and orcs gathered their troops and came towards Dawn City. There was no time written on it, but it was not difficult to guess from the panicked handwriting that it should be not far from now. This was definitely not good news, and Tian Maiduo and Fu Rong's faces turned slightly blue. In fact, for these two people, war is far away from their lives. Tian Maiduo is better. After all, he has been in this world for 3 years. Although he has been hiding before, he has seen some battle scenes. As for Fu Rong, it is more difficult. After all, knowing about battles and experiencing a battle in person are two completely different things. The battle in Dignity City not long ago was the first large-scale battle they encountered. It must be said that the battle that lasted for many days left them with more or less psychological trauma. They had just been safe for a few days, and their logistics were not even fully operational, but they had encountered new enemies. This time, it was not just the orcs that were invading, there were also trolls. These two races were not easy to deal with in the desolate continent. It was already very difficult to deal with one alone, and now they had to face two people together. Although neither of them said anything, it was not difficult to see from their expressions that they were heavy-hearted. Fu Rong let out a long breath and asked T1, "Isn't it said that because of the curse, neither trolls, elves, or even orcs can enter Dawn City?" "That's what I said." T1 tapped his fingers gently on the armrest, thinking about the past of Dawn City that Kay had told him. There are 3 ancient main cities on the desolate continent, belonging to humans, trolls, and elves respectively. After humans were killed by orcs, it was natural that the orcs wanted to take Dawn City into their pockets. Unfortunately, both trolls and elves wanted to do so. The 3 races fought together. The scale of the battle was not large. The main participants were trolls and elves. Orcs also wanted to participate, but unfortunately, their strength was not enough at that time, so they just watched and withdrew from the fight for Dawn City. This is also the premise for the orcs to build their own main city, Opportunity Port. If they could get Dawn City at the beginning, there would be no Opportunity Port later. Later, the trolls and elves each suffered a lot in the war, so they took a step back and cursed Dawn City to prevent elves and trolls from entering. As for the orcs, they were also cursed, but humans. I heard that when the curse was cast, humans were also within the scope of the curse, but for some reason, as long as the curse was added to humans, the curse would not take effect. After trying countless times, the high priests of the trolls and elves could only take a step back and not add humans to the curse, but only target orcs, trolls, and elves. This curse lasted for a long time. At least in the past 300 years, none of the 3 races could get close to Dawn City. However, as time passed, the seal left by the high priest who cast the curse had been slowly worn away, and the restraint it could bring was getting weaker and weaker. This was also the reason why the synthetic failures, such as human snakes, could survive in Dawn City in recent years. After all, they were neither orcs nor trolls, but just mutant beasts. T1 thought that there must be an accurate time limit for the authority of this curse, and the trolls, elves, and even the orcs knew about this time limit. Otherwise, even if they knew that humans were living in Dawn City, they would have no way to deal with it. But now, they sent a large number of orcs and trolls to besiege, so they must have some trump card. It's just that T1 and the others don't know this trump card. After listening to T1's explanation, Tian My Duo put forward a different view. "I don't think it's necessarily because the curse seal is loosened, maybe it's because of something else." Other? T1 and Fu Rong couldn't help but feel a lot of curiosity when they heard Tian Mai's words, and their attention was all focused on Tian My Duo in an instant. Tian My Duo didn't beat around the bush with the two of them, and said directly, "Do you know that there is something called the void in this world?" T1's eyebrows jumped uncontrollably. Chapter 117. Fu Rong shook her head. This world is already unpredictable and crazy enough. Living with people who only appear in games and novels, and being hunted by them all the time, this is already enough to make Fu Rong exhausted. Now there is something that she has never heard of, but she is very afraid of it when she sees Tian Mai's expression. Fu Rong even has a feeling that it is better to die. Fu Rong Sui Yushikong doesn't know, but T1 knows. Not only did she know about this thing, but she had also dealt with it before, and had almost suffered losses from it several times. She was deeply impressed by it. However, she did not intend to tell the two people about this matter, so she followed Fu Rong's silence and did not speak. Tian My Duo saw that the two did not speak after he asked, so he guessed that they did not know about the void, so he told the origin of this thing. The world did not look like it is now at the beginning. The desolate continent at that time was actually the same as the old world. The night only occupied about 8 hours of a day. However, things changed a few hundred years ago. At that time, humans were still obsessed with studying orcs, and trolls and elves also felt that the world was too boring because they had been there for too long. No matter what race or person, as long as they felt that the days were too boring, it meant that they would soon do something. At that time, the high priests of the trolls and elves were actually classmates. They had studied under the same teacher, and were said to be good friends. Unfortunately, when they returned to their own ethnic countries, their relationship gradually became estranged for the sake of their own race. What really made them enemies was a seal. It was related to Dawn City. The seal they made was the curse seal of Dawn City. It was originally very successful, but unfortunately, something went wrong during the whole process, and their seal was backfired. Both of them were seriously injured, but that was not the point. When they sealed, they tore a hole in time and space, and from that hole, something they had never seen before popped out. This is the void. Later, no one knew what happened, but the power of the void continued to flow into this world from that hole. By the time the first priest of the desolate world, the teacher of these two people, noticed this, the void had almost submerged this world. The first priest of the world took great pains to stuff the void back to its original place, and reinforced the seal, sealing the original entrance to the void in Dawn City tightly. It can be said that no matter what happened later, the initial void breach in Dawn City was the most solid, and could not be leaked anyway. Because of this revision, the first priest had exhausted all his energy in the battle with the void and died on the battlefield. It was also because of the death of the teacher that the two great priests of the trolls and elves finally tore their faces apart and became in a state of opposition. After that, there were many years of peace. Although at this time humans had been counterattacked by orcs, and the few remaining humans were expelled from Dawn City, it was still relatively peaceful for the desolate continent. However, such peace suddenly broke after the seal was reinforced 40 years later. The void came back again. This time it tried to be smarter. It no longer confronted the strong men on the desolate continent, but changed to a gentler method. It began to integrate itself into this world silently, and became a part of the night. As it continued to invade, the night of this world began to become longer and longer. Probably when it completely shrouded this world in darkness, the desolate continent would be swallowed up by it. At this time, the two great priests of the trolls and elves had to put aside their hatred and stand together again to declare war on the void. This battle lasted for several years, and both high priests died in the war, but their deaths were not useless. They completely damaged the void, causing it to retreat into its own territory and never appear again. It was a pity that the daytime eroded by it could never return to its original state, and the nights were still longer and the days were shorter, but at that time, the nights were safe. As time passed, the void that had not died recovered again. This time, it was more cautious and once again began to erode the desolate continent. Many years passed, and the desolate continent became what it is now. It was safe during the day, but it became increasingly unsafe at night, especially in the dead of night, when it was extremely dangerous. Fortunately, when several main cities and small cities were built, some light materials were needed. These things retained the pure power of the high priests at that time, which could protect these cities, and prevent them from being annihilated in the night. This is the main reason why people can come out and move around in the city at night. However, this seemingly balanced state cannot satisfy the appetite of the void, especially in the past few decades. It has developed many believers, letting them walk on its behalf in this world, just waiting for one day to assimilate all the people. By that time, even if the void itself cannot come to the desolate continent from its original world, the desolate continent has already become its possession. When she said this, He-Wan unconsciously recalled the time in Broken Rock Town. The priests there wore purple robes, and there was a purple light in their eyes. They even tried to use themselves as the best to summon the void. Unfortunately, they failed. Later, when she was outside the Hope camp, she was captured by the void in the darkness again. If she hadn't dodged quickly, she would not be sitting here now. He-Wan asked, "Do you mean that there are people among the orcs and trolls who are colluding with the void?" Tion Maiduo nodded. "That's what I guessed, but I don't know the details. I came to this world 3 years earlier than you, and I have seen many people at the bottom being corrupted by the void. What will happen if they are corrupted?" Fu Rong asked immediately. Her hands were tightly grasping the clothes on her chest, and her eyes were fixed on Tion Maiduo. It can be seen that this matter made her very concerned and nervous. If the strength is relatively weak, they will be directly dragged into the night, and become part of the void. In fact, most of the monsters we met in the night are actually transformed from these people with insufficient strength. Tion Maiduo seemed to have recalled some unpleasant past events. His eyebrows were tightly knitted, and his expression was very anxious. And even if a person with weak strength is corrupted, he will be injected with the power of the void, and his strength will increase many times. He-Wan's eyes stayed on each of the two people for a while. Although neither of them said anything, He-Wan guessed that the reason these two people became like this was probably because they both had a story that they didn't want to tell others. Just like me. He-Wan was not very curious, and did not like gossip. He skipped these things and asked Tian Maiduo another question that she cared about the most. How to deal with the void? Do you have to use magic? When Yuan asked this question, he was recalling what happened when he fought with the void in Shattered Rock Town. What did he use at that time, and how did he defeat the opponent? Did he use a knife or a gun? Or did they use some props? Yuan didn't recall for a long time, because Tian Maiduo immediately gave her an accurate answer. No, based on my observations over the past few years and my personal experiences, I found that the void doesn't necessarily need any magic, even swords can hurt them, but they are all strong and good at ambushes, and many people have lost their lives before they can fight. Yuan nodded and said, so, they can also be hurt by hot weapons? Fu Rong and Tian Maiduo were stunned for a moment, and they all looked at Yuan, with an expression of disbelief in their eyes. Fu Rong's lips began to tremble. Yuan, what do you mean? Do you mean to use hot weapons against the void? Tian Maiduo spoke much faster than Fu Rong, as if he remembered something. But when should we use it? The void will not appear during the day, and when they appear, no one on the desolate continent can leave the city. This seems to be a dead end. What's the big deal? We can stand on the city wall and fight them. When Yuan talked about hot weapons, he had actually already thought about how to solve this problem. Yuan's proposal immediately aroused the interest of Tian Maiduo and Fu Rong. They even stood up impatiently and wanted to go to the military factory to see the situation. Yuan sat on the chair and looked back at the cold sunlight outside. His mind had already turned to other places. These voids cannot enter the city, they will only wander outside the city. The shooting distance of hot weapons is much longer than that of cold weapons. Even if a few bullets miss, isn't there something called a bomb? The raw materials that Yuan gave Fu Rong were not just a little bit. So many materials can make a lot of ammunition. Now their problem is that the production line can't keep up. However, it is not unsolvable. Yuan opened her character production panel with her eyes asleep, and suddenly she saw something. Chapter 118. Magic Cannon. This thing was obtained by Yuan when she was fighting the Red Dragon back in Area E7. At that time, Yuan only had enough materials to make one, and the magic cannon was directly scrapped when fighting the Red Dragon. After that, Yuan had no chance to use this thing again, and forgot about its existence over time. Now, when she mentioned fighting the orcs, trolls, or the void, she remembered that she still had this thing. Yuan didn't think much about it, and sorted out all the materials he had, and put them together. When the people from Fu Rong's military factory team saw the magic turret that Yuan brought over, everyone was stunned, and then they were all very happy as if they had found a treasure. In particular, several engineers carefully studied the magic turret, and found that it was not difficult to use this thing to transform it into a turret made of thermal weapons, so they became even more excited. The scouts sent by Fu Yi have sent back information. According to their investigation, the trolls and orcs have gathered outside the Black Forest. They set up camp there, but they have no intention of attacking immediately, because the scouts found that they had already started to set up tents, which means that the trolls and orcs define this battle as a long-lasting battle. If it was a short battle, they would not waste so much effort. Yuan listened to Fu Yi's report and did not speak immediately. Instead, Fu Yi began to speculate based on the information he had obtained. It seems that they are not going to start a battle immediately, but they have surrounded the exit of Dawn City. What is their purpose? What is the purpose? There is nothing to say. The orcs and trolls came here together, and stationed in a big way. It must not be for fun. Their purpose is to kill all humans. Maybe there are other purposes besides this. For example, they want to get Dawn City. But Dawn City is far away from the main cities of the orcs and trolls. Why do they go to such great lengths to get this city? To expand their territory? It doesn't seem so. Neither the orcs nor the trolls seem to be so determined to get Dawn City. Rather than saying that they want to kill all the humans, it's better to say that they want to get something in Dawn City. Otherwise, they would not have treated Dawn City as non-existent when no humans were stationed here, but would have become anxious as soon as humans entered Dawn City. They even couldn't wait to gather all the soldiers together and surround the entire Dawn City. You know, they didn't surround a city, but because of the cursed seal, they could only surround the Black Forest outside the Dawn City. Dawn City is already very huge, and even so many humans living in Dawn City only occupy a small area inside Dawn City. You can imagine how much troops it would take to surround Dawn City and the Black Forest outside. With so many troops, it's no wonder that Ming Zhao was so nervous when he found out about this. But what are they going to find in Dawn City? Yuan could only guess one clue. That is related to the cursed seal, and the things left by the first priest in Dawn City. Yuan felt that she needed to find someone who was very familiar with the terrain. So she found Kay. Kay was very unhappy. After humans entered Dawn City, they built a military factory as soon as possible. Kay was so jealous of this that he successfully entered the military factory with the promise He-Wan promised, and then immediately became as smooth as a fish in water. Kay never thought that weapons could be made like this. In comparison, the things he had studied before were really like garbage. This period of time was the happiest thing for Kay in his life, especially in the morning, when He-Wan took out a magic cannon. Now the engineers at the military factory have modified the magic cannon. If this continues, a turret that can release heat weapons will soon be produced. In this case, Kay couldn't even take his eyes off it, fearing that he would not learn it by accident. But He-Wan came to him at this time. If it was someone else, Kay would never pay attention to him, but if this person was He-Wan, thinking about the contract he had signed, and thinking about the fact that He-Wan seemed to have a lot of money to make. So, after careful consideration, Kay could only run over reluctantly. He-Wan, you better have something important to do otherwise. Kay tried to act fiercely, trying to threaten He-Wan. Especially when he saw He-Wan gave the blueprint of making magic cannon directly to the engineer who came with him. This threat became very sincere. He-Wan raised his eyes, and glanced at Kay. All the words Kay had said were blocked under his tongue. He became silent, and didn't dare to fart, let alone threaten. Where was the curse sealed in the past? He-Wan didn't beat around the bush with Kay, and asked the question he cared about most directly. Kay probably didn't expect He-Wan to ask this question at all. He froze in place, his eyes widened, his face turned pale, and his mouth couldn't close. After a long time, he stammered, "Why do you ask this question?" He-Wan did not answer Kay. She did not need to explain to Kay. Kay also realized this very quickly, but after realizing this, his face became even uglier, as pale as a crumpled paper. He-Wan, you are asking this question because you want to go to that place, right? After saying this, Kay did not wait for He-Wan to answer, and shook his head vigorously. No, 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 you can't go to this place. That place is too scary. He-Wan still didn't say anything. She just looked at Kay quietly, but her persistence and her meaning were accurately conveyed to Kay in this silent silence. Gradually, Kay's voice of rejection became lower and lower. His face turned blue, and even the spirit in his eyes was completely lost. Kay sat on the ground with a spiritless look, and the whole person showed a decadent state. He lowered his head. After a long time, he took a deep breath, and his small body showed a big ups and downs, and then raised his head. He-Wan saw a kind of determination in Kay's expression, and he said, "Okay, if you insist on going, I can take you there." He-Wan nodded, and she knew Kay would not refuse. However, as the person at the top of the food chain, she still generously said to Kay, "Of course, you can make a request." However, what was unexpected was that Kay did not immediately open his mouth as usual after hearing this, but pulled the corner of his mouth and showed a very bitter smile to He-Wan. "Forget it. Wait until you can come back alive." After that, Kay did not continue to complain. He just told He-Wan about the situation in that place, and asked He-Wan to prepare some things. Then, they agreed to go there in the quiet night. During this period, He-Wan also received some good news. The first was the news about the trolls and orcs. Just as He-Wan and Fu-Yi guessed, they were indeed prepared for a long-term battle. From the beginning of the stationing, they not only started to live and cook, but also started patrolling. According to the orcs and trolls, they probably want to surround humans and kill them in Dawn City. Unfortunately, it is not easy to do this. After all, there is a black forest that can provide humans with necessary materials. Therefore, for the time being, the threat of trolls and orcs to Dawn City is psychological, and there is no substantial threat. I just don't know if the speculation about the void is true. Second, with the hard work of many engineers and Kay, several production lines have all started working smoothly, and the success rate is very high, and the waste of materials due to failure is very small. The third and most important point is that before He-Wan left, she had once again obtained samples from the military factory, and this time, there were quite a few samples. After He-Wan prepared the items that Kay had asked for, she arrived at the agreed place at the agreed time. From a distance, she saw Kay bending over and applying something on his legs. He-Wan asked curiously, "What are you doing?" Kay pointed to his legs and said, "My legs are made of metal and cannot touch water. In order to avoid rust, I have to apply grease in this." Following Kay's finger, He-Wan saw that each side of his feet was covered with something like a balloon, but only the size of a fist. "My legs are made of metal, and are relatively heavy. If I didn't have this airbag, I would sink directly to the bottom of the water." He-Wan nodded, indicating that he understood. Kay asked He-Wan again. Have you prepared the underwater breathing potion I asked you to prepare? He-Wan, yes, I prepared a lot according to your requirements. He-Wan opened her backpack and checked her prepared supplies again while speaking. Ever since Kay asked her to prepare the underwater breathing potion, she knew that the sealed place was in the water, but He-Wan tried hard to recall where there was water in Dawn City, but the results were in vain. Until Kay took He-Wan to an extremely desolate place. Chapter 119. It is not quite accurate to say that it is desolate. This is a wide square, covered with all kinds of plants, almost drowning the place. If you don't observe carefully, it is difficult to find that this is a square. In the middle of the square is a low hillside, and on the hillside is a larger peak. Or it should be said that this is a magnificent building, and the small hillside is its high stairs. However, this place is far away from the current human living area, and the plants here are unusually dense. From time to time, crows fly through it, making chilling calls. In the darkness, He-Wan looked over with her excellent night vision and felt that it looked like a huge tomb and tombstone. What was this place? He-Wan stood here with Kay for a while. She went through all the buildings in her mind, but she really didn't know what kind of building was under this dense vegetation. This was the Cathedral of Light in Dawn City, where the High Priest of Mankind lived and served the God of Light. Kay wrinkled his nose slightly and said, however, I heard that when humans were counterattacked by orcs, the High Priest did not come out to fight. Therefore, some people say that the High Priest has died long ago. Otherwise, the orcs would not have overthrown humans so easily. At this point, Kay took out a pair of glasses and handed them to He-Wan. Wear this, you can see the road more clearly. He-Wan now has the glasses that Lejixi gave her, which can see through the weaknesses of all creatures. She doesn't want to give up this pair of glasses, so she puts the glasses Kay gave her on top of this pair. I thought it was impossible, but when I looked up again, I found that the effects of these two glasses could be superimposed. The glasses that Kay handed to He-Wan were infrared, and when she added the glasses she was wearing, she could see the whole situation in the cathedral. There were many creatures lurking in the cathedral, which had not been visited for a long time, but they were not powerful creatures, mostly animals. He-Wan and Kay walked into the cathedral, and the animals that originally lived here were frightened and ran around, making strange noises. Although Kay was a little nervous, he was not too scared. Instead, he quickened his pace, and led He-Wan around the wide hall of the cathedral, and walked towards another extremely hidden room. Because it had been abandoned for too long, He-Wan could not tell what it was used for. There was only a staircase in a corner of the room that went down. The staircase was not very wide and spiraled downward, but it seemed to have no end. He-Wan did not know how long he had walked here. Suddenly, the view in front of him became extremely wide. It was a huge room. There were many statues of different shapes on both sides of the room. These statues were men and women, and without exception, they all wore a crown on their heads. Behind these statues are layers of various stone coffins. It is obvious that this is the cemetery of the former human royal family. He-Wan is also a person who has seen the world and is never afraid of death and corpses. However, when walking in this place, she still feels that the temperature here is much lower than outside. She can even hear the whistling wind ringing in her ears. The ground is wet. When Kay walks, he will slip from time to time on the thick moss on the stone road, but he can quickly stabilize his body and continue to walk inside. Although this room is large, it is not the end. He-Wan followed Kay through a low door, and the view in front of him became wider again. There was another room, but this room was empty. Perhaps it was a cemetery prepared by the royal family of Dawn City for the future. After passing through this room, He-Wan saw a huge pool of water. In the dark cemetery, the appearance of this pool of water seemed very strange. At this time, He-Wan finally understood why Kay asked him to prepare the underwater breathing potion. You are really familiar with this place. He-Wan said this to Kay. She was not being sarcastic, but she really felt that it was not easy for Kay to be so familiar with such a deserted city. Kay just sighed. People, in fact, it is better not to have too strong curiosity. Sometimes curiosity is linked to how long you can live. He-Wan raised his eyebrows and signaled Kay with his eyes. Are you saying that this is scary? Yes. Kay was already preparing to go into the water, and he once again greased his mechanical limbs. How scary is it? He-Wan was a little curious. Kay's expression became even uglier. He glanced at He-Wan, sighed, and said, You know when you go down? Don't be scared and scream. After all, it's underwater. He-Wan became more curious about his mysterious attitude. She looked at the quiet, green water and thought, what could be so scary? Could it be a great white shark? Huh? It turns out that He-Wan, the mercenary, has a very poor imagination. When she jumped into the water and swam down a few meters, she found something wrong. There were countless huge iron chains in the pool, which were nailed to the pool wall in all directions. But the weird thing was that according to the laws of physics, these iron chains should form a natural arc downwards. But the arc of the iron chains here was upwards, as if the gravity came from the sky. If it was just this, He-Wan would not find it strange. After all, she had seen too many strange things since she entered this world, so there was no need to make a fuss about this. However, she found that things were not that simple. Looking down, He-Wan saw black dots in the water, which seemed to be pillars, standing straight in the water. He-Wan found that Kay's diving speed became faster. He seemed to be very afraid of this area, and wanted to leave here quickly. He-Wan didn't understand what was here, but he still followed Kay and sped up. However, during the dive, she accidentally hit a pillar next to her, and the pillar was slowly rotated by her. He-Wan was stunned for a moment. This touch did not feel like wood. It was not until this time that she focused on the pillar she hit. It was also at this moment that He-Wan suddenly saw a pale green face turn around and met her face to face. Even if He-Wan had seen a lot of things in the world, even if she had ended countless lives, at this moment, when she suddenly saw this terrible picture, He-Wan's heart couldn't help but twitch. It was a young face, delicate and handsome, with golden hair floating with the flow of water. However, this face was not facing her, but upside down. In other words, he was suspended in the water with his head down, his feet were straight up, and his head was at the bottom. A slightly thinner iron chain was hung around his neck, and the other end of the iron chain was tied to the thick iron chain that was crisscrossed. His hands were hanging naturally, but the direction of this hanging was completely opposite to He-Wan's. In other words, this person was also affected by gravity, but this gravity was completely opposite to the gravity that He-Wan and others could feel. He-Wan took 2 deep breaths to calm her pounding heart. She turned her head and looked around. It was only then that she realized that the pillars she had thought were corpses. And each corpse was like the one in front of her, falling over. Even though He-Wan was used to seeing life and death, she felt her scalp tingling when she saw this scene. At this moment, Kay's voice suddenly rang in her ears. "Hurry up and leave. You can't stay next to these corpses for too long." Just as He-Wan was about to ask why, she found that the corpse facing her suddenly opened his eyes. He waved his arms at He-Wan as if he had discovered something exciting, and even his boss showed a chilling smile. Kay screamed in fear, and turned around and swam down without caring about He-Wan. He-Wan found that the fallen corpse was holding an iron chain in his hand, and the chain was exactly the same as the one hanging around his neck. He wouldn't want to hang me here too. He-Wan's heart tightened, and he didn't care about continuing his research. He followed Kay, and quickly dived down. It didn't take long for him to get out of the range of the corpses. He-Wan looked back and found that it was not just this corpse that had just woken up, but all the nearby test subjects had woken up. They had obviously chased He-Wan all the way, but unfortunately they didn't catch up in the end, so they returned to their own place and fell asleep again. It turned into a pile of upside-down pillars. Who are they? He-Wan caught up with Kay in a few seconds. Kay shook his head like a rattle. "I don't know. I was almost caught by them the last time I came here. I really don't want to recall the situation at that time." Soon, they sank to the bottom of the water, and at the deepest part of the water, He-Wan saw a door. The door was just an ordinary wooden door, and there was no lock on it. What's even more weird is that at such a deep bottom of the water, it was not affected by the pressure at all, and it was pushed open with a casual push. And there are 4 words written on this door. Upside Down Abyss. Under these 4 words, there is a row of small words, written in a flamboyant style, but very beautiful. How can you be sure that everything you see is true? How can you be sure that the place you are in now is not a huge lie? Chapter 120. Looking at these 2 extremely philosophical sentences, He-Wan pushed open the wooden door. What is behind the underwater door? It may not be water anyway. After He-Wan pushed it open, he did not see the endless waters, but entered a dry and bright room. Yes, dry and bright. How weird. After He-Wan entered the door, he felt that the light in front of him was very warm, dispelling the moisture and coldness he brought from the darkness and water. She looked back. There was a body of water outside the door behind her. The people hanging upside down were still quietly in the water. However, there was not a drop of water in this room. The 2 sentences she had just seen on the door immediately appeared in He-Wan's mind. How can you be sure that everything you see is true? How can you be sure that the place you are in now is not a huge lie? At this moment, these 2 sentences and this room seemed to become a real reflection. Kay shook off the water droplets on his body and exhaled a long breath. It's too scary. If possible, I don't want to come here again. The room is not big, but there is a strange and complicated pattern on the floor of the room. If nothing unexpected happens, this should be the cursed seal. Contrary to the general stereotype, this cursed seal is not in the dark and scary room. Instead, it is bright and warm here. The seal is also golden, emitting a holy light that makes people want to get close. There were 2 chairs facing each other beside the seal, and one person sat on each chair, wearing a red and a white robe respectively. Dry and rotten bones were exposed under the big hood, and it was obvious that these were 2 people who had died a long time ago. Juan stood in front of them, and looked at the 2 dry bones carefully, only to find that the robes on them were very exquisite. It was not difficult to infer that their status in life should have been very noble. Juan turned around and asked Kay, "Who are they?" That's right, Kay didn't follow Juan. In fact, after entering the room and shaking off the water droplets on his body, he was surprised and said, "There is actually another room here. I didn't find it last time." Juan asked curiously, "Then how do you know the cursed seal is here?" Kay took out a strangely shaped compass, pressed the button on it, and saw the pointer on the compass spinning wildly, and soon pointed to this place. He said, "My treasure will react to curses, seals, and treasures. I have never found it spinning so wildly. Last time I reached the place where the dead were hanging upside down, and didn't go any further. I only know that there is a seal below, but I don't know where it is exactly." As he said this, he became proud again. "I found that I have a bit of talent as an explorer. Look, I found such a difficult place." Before he finished speaking, he looked up and saw the 2 corpses sitting next to the seal in the room. Kay immediately let out a sharp scream, hugged his head, and shrank at the door, saying no to approach. Juan knew that he was afraid of dead people. Maybe he was afraid of those who had just died, but as long as the face was weird or strange, or if they had died a long time ago, he was afraid. So Juan did not force him, and walked to the side of the seal to study it. It was not until she saw the patterns on the robes of the 2 corpses that she asked the trembling Kay. Hearing Juan's question, Kay finally loosened his hands around his head and answered, "I don't know." "You didn't even look at it. How can you not know?" "I don't dare to look at it, but I'm sure I don't know, because I definitely don't know what I dare to look at." Juan sneered, took out a pistol from her backpack, and pulled the safety. This is the latest thing she got from the military factory today, and this is her first time using it, just in time to give this timid dwarf a taste of meat. Although Kay had not been with Juan for a long time, he still had some understanding of this woman's behavior and methods. When he heard the click sound of the pistol, he immediately jumped up from the ground, as if nothing had happened just now, and walked directly to Juan with a flattering smile. Without waiting for Juan to ask, he pointed at the mummy in the red robe and said, "This should be the first sacrifice." "Juan, how can you be sure?" Kay pointed to a 6-pointed star with a luxurious and complex pattern hanging outside the red robe and said, "This thing, this is something that only the first priest has. I have seen it in history books. The history books say that this thing is lost, and is an ancient relic." As he said this, he seemed to be lost in thought and muttered to himself, "I didn't expect this thing to appear in this place. It seems that the first priest brought it here to seal the void. I heard that this thing has powerful magic, and anyone who touches it will die." Before Kay finished speaking, he saw the hexagram being picked up by someone. All of Kay's voices disappeared at once. He widened his eyes, and looked at Juan in horror. "Didn't you hear what I just said?" "Juan, what?" "This thing has powerful magic power. Anyone who touches it will die." Juan's face still had a matter-of-fact expression. "Really?" "I know." Kay could no longer say a word. He could only look at the hexagram helplessly. However, the hexagram was just like an ordinary accessory, lying quietly in Juan's palm, without any difference. What huge magic power, what death, it seemed that nothing happened. Kay stared at Juan for a few seconds, and after confirming that Juan was indeed fine, he curled his lips and muttered like a complaint, "It seems that this history book and legend cannot be believed casually." However, before Kay finished speaking, he saw that the hexagram that had been quietly staying in Juan's palm suddenly emitted a dazzling huge light. Kay was so scared that he immediately shrank back all the words he hadn't finished saying, and rushed to the corner of the room, holding his head with his butt sticking out, shouting, "I didn't touch it. Don't kill me!" The light of the hexagram was indeed very dazzling, making Juan unable to open her eyes, but she didn't feel any discomfort in her palms. Instead, she felt as if she was holding a ball of warm fire, and a handful of gentle wind in her palms. The light emitted from the hexagram changed from one to several, and then to countless, dispersing in all directions in the room, and finally filling the entire room. He-Huan watched as the withered corpse in the red robe gradually turned into ashes under the light of the hexagram, and the robe slid lightly to the ground. On the contrary, the withered bones in the white robe did not turn into ashes, nor did they disappear. Instead, the light fell into the robe little by little, causing flesh and blood to grow rapidly on the withered bones. The withered corpse covered by the white robe also filled up little by little. Finally, when all the dazzling light was cast into the white robe, He-Huan saw a person sitting there. He moved his shoulders slightly, then gently moved his body, and finally tried to stand up. This is a person. A tall man. The white hood slipped off his head, revealing a young and handsome face. He just looked at He-Huan, showing a gentle and polite smile. This is dangerous. Although everything here appears warm, bright, and harmless, He-Huan knows that sometimes danger is hidden under this seemingly harmless appearance. Her mind kept telling her that she needed to defend and fight. However, He-Huan's body could not move at all. She couldn't even blink her eyes. She could only watch the man slowly approach her. The distance between them was not far, but He-Huan felt that the man had been walking for a long time. Finally, the man stood in front of He-Huan. It was not until this time that He-Huan realized that the man's body was not completely solid, but a little transparent, looking like a ghost. He spoke. Finally, I'm back here. The voice was mellow, powerful, warm, and very pleasant. It was the first time he heard it, but He-Huan felt strangely familiar. Where had he heard it before? Thank you. You brought me back here again before my strength ran out. The man said so. As he spoke, he raised his hand and gently placed it on He-Huan's head. As a mercenary who lives on the edge of a knife, he never lets anyone get close to his head easily. This is too dangerous. When the man did this, He-Huan's body was screaming wildly, and her body was tense uncontrollably, but she couldn't resist and couldn't move. In particular, the man's palm seemed to have a holy and mysterious power. The moment it touched He-Huan's head, all her tense nerves and tense body relaxed. There was an indescribable sense of comfort flowing out from her body. Then, He-Huan saw the man raised his hand again, and as he raised his hand, He-Huan also saw a dark golden light appear in his palm. This light seemed to be pulled out from He-Huan's body. At the moment of being pulled out, He-Huan had an inexplicable feeling of emptiness filling his whole body. The dark golden light quickly merged with the man in front of him, and the man said again, "Thank you, He-Huan, thank you for bringing me back." Chapter 121. To be honest, when she heard this man's words, her mind was full of question marks. What does it mean? When did she bring him back? No, that's not right. When did she meet this man? And when did she promise to bring him back? No, why did this man say something she didn't understand without any reason? No, that's not right. At this moment, a strange and incredible thought suddenly popped up in He-Huan's mind. As soon as this thought came up, He-Huan couldn't wait to deny it. It was incredible. Has she stayed in this crazy world for too long? How could she have such an incredible idea? Because at this time, He-Huan thought of that special prompt. Since she arrived in Dawn City, this special prompt has not been active. Before that, although this special prompt was not very stable, sometimes it would give her more prompts, and sometimes it seemed very lazy and rarely appeared. However, it became silent and disappeared after she first stepped into the Black Forest. It was as if it had never existed. At one point, He-Huan felt uncomfortable. After all, she was familiar with those dark gold characters rolling in her vision. Suddenly, it became clear and clean, which made people feel a little weird. Wait, dark gold? He-Huan suddenly seemed to realize something. Those characters in her vision were always dark gold, and the light that the man had just pulled away from her body was also dark gold. Could it be that what I guessed was right? No way, this man was actually in my body all along. Just when a thought popped up in He-Huan's mind and her face unconsciously became uglier with these weird thoughts, this man smiled and spoke. As if he had become a worm in He-Huan's stomach, the first sentence this man said made He-Huan, who was always emotionally stable, unable to hold back. He said, "I can't read your mind, I don't know what's going on in your head, and I can't change your cognition to influence your judgment. The only thing I can do is to give you hints about what I saw." He-Huan immediately shouted, "You still say you don't know, I was just thinking about this." The man smiled bitterly helplessly. He was like a tolerant old man who met a naughty child. No matter what the child did or said, he could solve it calmly and show tolerance. "I really don't know. It's a taboo to peek into someone's heart. I don't have enough strength to support it. If I continue to violate the taboo, I'm afraid I would have disappeared long ago." Although this reason was not enough to completely convince He-Huan, it successfully calmed He-Huan down from the excitement just now. She took a deep breath and told herself to put these unimportant things aside for the time being, because now she needed to know something more important. For example, who are you? Since the dark golden light ball pulled out from He Huan's body merged into the man's body, the man's translucent body has become a solid entity visible to the naked eye. Now, it is completely indistinguishable from a normal person. He Huan walked slowly around the man, looking him up and down as he walked, not wanting to miss even a hair, wishing his eyes could become X-rays, so that he could see the man clearly from inside to outside. The man didn't seem to mind He Huan's impolite look, and even showed a tolerant smile on his face. His answer to He Huan was not positive, but it seemed to answer her question. This is my home, my burial place, and the eternal place where my soul rests. He Huan thought about what Kay had told her before, that this place was the church of the human kingdom, and the high priest of mankind once lived here, but later the high priest disappeared. Could this man be the high priest of mankind? He Huan asked this question, and the man nodded, but then shook his head. Yes, and no, in front of the world, they do call me the high priest, but... The man paused, as if thinking of an accurate word. I am Dawn City, and Dawn City is me. He Huan tried hard to understand what the man said, and finally felt that this man was probably similar to the mountain god of China in the old times. Maybe the summary is not very accurate, but let it be, because He Huan has something he has always wanted to know and wants to ask this man. However, before He Huan could speak, he saw this man raised his hand and flicked it lightly in the air. Then, golden light suddenly flowed rapidly on the ground beside He Huan. The man said, Okay, you can ask me any questions you have. I know you have a lot of questions. We have a lot of time. I can explain it to you slowly. As he said this, he spread his hands and looked apologetic. After all, I know that I owe you an explanation. Okay. Since the other party's attitude was so good, He Huan also relaxed a little. She nodded and discovered something by the way. Kay, who was originally in the corner with his butt sticking out and holding his head, looked very unreal after being covered by this golden light, just like a background board. While He Huan's attention was still on Kay, the man spoke again. What do you need to ask me? What's your name? He Huan asked. This is not a good question. The smile on the man's face faded a little, and he looked at He Huan with a half smile. Under normal circumstances, I can't tell anyone my name. You can't tell others your name. In the world, only God's name can't be told to others casually. Because God is spotless, but everyone in the world has sins and filth, so once you know God's name, you will die. Of course, this is a legend, and He Huan never believed it. However, when she heard the man say this, she couldn't help but associate it with something. Could this man really be a god? He Huan immediately gave up the idea of asking the man's name. She was an atheist. Even if she believed in God, she would not absolutely not believe in the inexplicable God in this weird world. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. Anyway, it's not you who will be in trouble if you don't say it. She can. Hey. Call him, as long as he can listen, there is no trouble. When He Huan was complaining in his heart, he heard the man speak again. He said, But for you, I can tell you my name. Why? He Huan's eyebrows raised. Because you are the one who brought me here. In return, I can tell you my name. He Huan's mouth twitched when he heard it. Hey, you should understand clearly, if you want to thank someone, it is best to see something practical, such as some powerful artifact, or some gold and silver jewelry. If not, you can give me some hints. Now that you have saved everything, just tell me your name directly. Is that enough? Do you think your name is a gold coin, a hard currency? Perhaps the disgust on He Huan's face was too obvious, so the man was a little embarrassed. He sighed and changed the subject. Besides that, do you have anything else to ask? When He Huan was told that her reward was to know the man's name, she was no longer interested in what the man said next. She did not answer the man's question, but asked, Why not put it this way? What do you want me to know? Tell me what you want me to know. He Huan's seemingly casual words made the man's eyes become serious. He looked at He Huan with a cautious look, but He Huan was not afraid of his gaze at all, but greeted him openly. After the two looked at each other for a few seconds, the man slowly spoke. Since you can come here, I think you also know about the things in Dawn City, so I will start from the back of Dawn City. He Huan was not wrong. This person was indeed a god. He was the patron saint of humans in the desolate continent. His name was Ye. In the desolate continent, elves, trolls, and humans were races that had existed since the birth of the continent. These races had a very deep connection with the continent, and this connection naturally became the original seed of God. As the connection deepened, God was born. They each protected their own race for countless years, until humans began to madly hope to become gods, and they wanted to create another race. Races cannot be born randomly. If a race is not accepted by the desolate continent and cannot be linked, then there will be no guardian god. Races without guardian gods are like wild horses without reins. They are free, but they are also uncontrollable. This kind of freedom will bring great disasters, killings, and endless wars to the world. But humans don't take his warning seriously at all. Even if he transforms into a human and becomes their high priest, he can't stop this crazy decision. After Ya's repeated interference in the research failed, the orcs were finally born. From that day on, Ya knew that the destruction of mankind had come. What happened later was just as Ya expected. The whole world and all mankind were surrounded by anger and death. In the end, the Dawn City, which was once the most glorious in the desolate continent, became a ruin. And Ya, as the patron saint of mankind, lost all mankind, and also lost the connection with God. His divine power was rapidly dissipating. Chapter 122. He-Wan didn't know what the world of God was like, but he knew that even God was unwilling to disappear in this world. So Ya began to survive for himself and for mankind. He used his divine power to tear open the shackles of space and time, and pull people from other worlds into this world. Of course, he couldn't bring all the people from other worlds back here, but he could use some media. For example, people who logged into a certain game, people who read a certain book, people who were attracted by certain things. In short, in different eras, there will always be different ways to bring a large number of people into this world, hoping that they can survive in this world. However, when Ya was working hard, the elves and trolls were also working hard. Regardless of whether it was their god's instructions or not, none of the elves and trolls wanted humans to get more resources on this continent again. Later, an orc was added. In this way, at the beginning, Ya was very powerful. He kept summoning humans from different spaces and times to this world, but they were all slaughtered by other races without exception. Ya naturally wanted to stop such things. With his intervention, soon all the races on the great desolate continent found that slaughtering was no way to solve the endless flow of humans. So, they began to use a slower consumption method, that is, to treat humans as slaves and let them die in endless labor. As expected, this greatly reduced the speed of human summoning because the humans that appeared in the desolate continent could not be consumed. Ya was not willing to continue to summon humans like this. He needed humans to take root in this world, live on, and once again obtain their due status and connect with himself. However, due to his excessive interference in the development of humans, he was also punished by the power of the desolate continent. The speed at which he could summon humans became slower and slower, and he could no longer maintain his body, or even his soul power. In the end, he could only give up his body. Let all his divine power be concentrated in a small soul power. Every time he summoned a human, you would choose a human that was most compatible with his soul power, and guide him to explore the desolate continent, hoping that he could eventually lead other humans to regain the glory of humanity. However, before He-Wan, Ya had done this countless times, but failed. Coming to He-Wan, this was his last chance. If he failed this time, Ya would exhaust all his divine power, and finally his godhood would shatter, fall off the altar, and dissipate in this world. Fortunately, the person he chose this time was He-Wan, and He-Wan's excellence was beyond his expectations. He wanted to continue to help He-Wan, but unfortunately, he was too weak. After being away from his body for too long, his soul power was like a candle that was about to go out at any moment, so when he could guide He-Wan, he gave his all, but more often, he had to stay in He-Wan's consciousness and rely on her unyielding voice to nourish his own divine power. However, even so, he could not hold on to the end. When He-Wan stepped into the Dawn City, Ya's soul power fell into a deep sleep due to the seal and the restrictions of his body. He knew that he could only try so hard. As for whether he could return to the place where his body rested in the future, it would depend on luck. Fortunately, his luck was really good. Although he could not do anything and knew nothing in his sleep, when He-Wan walked into this room, he knew that he had finally taken back everything that belonged to him. He-Wan listened to Ya's story expressionlessly. When she was deeply moved, Ya's voice even became a little choked. However, such an effortful and sincere story could not make He-Wan empathize with her at all. She was a human being, and she didn't know the affairs of God. In short, she understood Ya's approach, but as one of the links in his long process of restoring his godhood, and the link that he did his best, He-Wan didn't feel happy. In particular, Ya, the stingy god, actually wanted to get rid of her with her own name, which made her even more unhappy. Congratulations then. He-Wan said it without any intention, but it seemed unlikely that she would wait for Ya to offer her a reward, so she asked directly, In other words, you have now regained your godhood? Ye spread his hands, and the smile on his face became more sincere. He nodded. Yes, so I say, I want to thank you, He Huan. Indeed, even He Huan could feel the change in you. When the body just stood up, the body was transparent, and then it became a solid body. But now, in just a few minutes, she saw a thin layer of golden light on Ye's body, just like the lovely golden light when the sun just climbed out from the horizon. More importantly, He Huan found that when she stayed in his body, not only were her various attributes constantly recovering, but some of her attribute points were also increasing. Within a few minutes of talking, her personal attribute points had increased by more than 1/3. He Huan felt that if she continued to stay, it might not take long for her current attribute points to double. This was not a pleasant surprise. This was what she deserved. He Huan was very confident. So I have done so much for you, a god, what kind of reward do you want to give me? He probably didn't expect He Huan to state his request so directly, and even asked for a reward by name. This was something he had never experienced before, and he was stunned for a moment. Instead, He Huan frowned unhappily. You don't plan to thank me with something substantial, do you? Ye finally came back to his senses. He looked at He Huan and recalled what happened during the time he stayed in her consciousness. He had observed this person, and had a certain understanding of her way of doing things. He couldn't help but laugh softly. Yes, this is the He Huan he knows. No matter what happens, he can't suffer any loss. He thought for a while and said, Okay, I can make you a promise. As long as you can help me complete all the things and let humans regain their former glory, I can promise you one thing. Seeing that He Huan was still frowning, Ye knew that she didn't take his promise seriously, so he said, You can use this promise to do anything. For example, you can be the king of humans and stand at the pinnacle of power in Dawn City. This was not what He Huan wanted, so when she heard Ye's promise, her expression did not relax. Ye also made some other promises, such as strong strength, huge wealth, and even a younger lover if He Huan was willing. However, when He Huan heard these things, her expression was still very calm. To be fair, are these things good? Very good. No matter what it is what people in the world pursue throughout their lives. But when it comes to He Huan, she always feels that it is a little bit short. Ye continued, Also, aren't you always worried about your pension in the old era? If you want, I can even send you back to your original world the moment you leave that world. When she said this, He Huan's expression finally changed a little. When she suddenly heard the news, He Huan's mind went blank, her lips trembled slightly, and her face showed a kind of surprise. Although it was only a little bit, but this expression could appear on He Huan's face, which was enough to prove her inner shock. Can I still go back? Ye nodded. Of course, I am a god. As long as humans can continue to deepen their connection with me, my lost soul power will continue to return, and my divine power will become stronger and stronger. Although sending people back is much more difficult than summoning them, if this person is you, this is something I can do. It must be said that He Huan was moved, so much so that she wanted to agree immediately. If she went back to the last mission, she could completely avoid the inevitable death. As long as she returned to the headquarters, she could start her retirement life. For He Huan, becoming a god is not as exciting as sitting on a recliner and basking in the sun in seclusion. However, when the words of promise were about to come out of her mouth, He Huan still held back. Ye smiled at her and said, You can think about it again. You don't need to make a decision now. I just said that if you can help me deepen the connection with humans and help humans regain their former glory, I will agree to you. I didn't ask you to answer me now. He Huan felt that Ye was not a kind-hearted god. It was not a happy thing to know people's hearts so well. However, Ye was right. She really needed to think about it again. Was returning to the old times really what she wanted? He Huan suppressed these thoughts and stretched out his hand to Ye again. Okay, I remember your promise first, so let's settle the previous rewards first. He Huan picked his fingers. You failed so many times, and finally had to stay dormant in my consciousness, relying on me to nourish your godhood, and relying on me to come back here and get your body again. What is your reward? Before He Huan finished speaking, he saw Ye stretched out her hand and covered his palm. The next second, He Huan felt his palm burning hot. Chapter 123. When he raised his hand again, He Huan found a 6-pointed star pattern in the middle of his palm, and there was a little bit of indescribable heat around the pattern. He Huan glanced at Ye and said nothing, but her eyes clearly showed a few words. That's it? That's the reward you gave me? Ye just pretended that she didn't see the extra emotions in He Huan's eyes, and still stood there with a smile. In the end, He Huan could only say, Well, tell me first, what do you want me to do? Ye was not polite and spoke directly, I need you to go to the Void World. Before he finished speaking, He-Wan immediately made a cross with both hands in front of his chest. Stop! I won't go. What a joke. She had faced the void twice since entering this world. One time was a head-on confrontation, and the other time was a sneak attack, but the feeling of both times was not very good. It can be said that it was very bad, especially on her shoulder blade. In fact, the pain of the void power has always remained. Sometimes when the pain was really severe, she could only rely on eating the blood of the red dragon to resist. Just being caught by the void for a while had such an effect. He-Wan didn't think that he could win against the void with his current mortal body. Therefore, He-Wan didn't think about Ye's proposal at all and rejected it immediately. It must be said that the tolerance of God is indeed different from that of humans. Anyway, if someone rejected his request so directly, He-Wan himself would not be very happy. But looking at Ye, he didn't seem to care about He-Wan's rejection at all, just nodded and said, "Then you can think about it again, and when you have thought it over, come here to find me." After that, without waiting for He-Wan to ask anything else, the golden barrier between Ye and He-Wan disappeared, and the originally frozen time began to flow again. Kay, who had just been hiding in the corner with his butt sticking up and holding his head, could now be seen by He-Wan trembling. Looking back, Ye, who was standing in front of He-Wan, gradually disappeared in the room. Even the corpse disappeared without a trace in the place where he disappeared. He-Wan felt the special prompt in his body. Although this special prompt was not controlled by He-Wan when it appeared, He-Wan could feel its existence even if it did not appear. But now, He-Wan could not feel anything. It seems that Ye did not lie to her. The special prompt was indeed him. If this world is not a game generated by data, then except for God, no one else can know this world so well. With a little bit of discomfort, He-Wan walked to Kay's side, raised his foot, and kicked his high and ugly buttocks. Kay was so scared that he almost jumped up from the ground, and he was screaming, What are you doing? I tell you, I am very powerful." When he found out that the person who kicked him was actually He-Wan, he relaxed from the tension and let out a long breath. "He-Wan, it's you." Kay seemed to remember something and continued to tense his body. "That's right. Where are those corpses? Where is this place? Why is there no water here? There must be something strange about this place." As he spoke, his eyes uncontrollably looked at the two seats next to the pattern. He was shocked when he saw it. Kay then realized that the two mummies that were just lying here had disappeared without a trace, and even the clothes they were wearing disappeared. The mummies, one in red and one in white robes, seemed to have never existed. Kay was stunned. He rubbed his eyes hard, and tried hard to think and recall. He couldn't help but question his brain. Did he remember it wrong? Why did the corpses that were clearly here just now suddenly disappear? However, He-Wan did not give him the time to think and recall. She did not want to stay in this place for a minute. Although He-Wan was still very reluctant to leave the special reminder thing, after all, with this thing, walking in the desolate continent was simply not a convenient description. But as long as she thought of the ultimate purpose of this thing, to let herself go to the void world, she felt that Ye's face was hateful again. "Hurry up and leave. Don't stay here," He-Wan said as he walked to the door and opened the wooden door. The water outside the wooden door seemed to be blocked by something, and would not flow into the room at all. He-Wan knew that Ye was still here. But she did not stop at all, and plunged into the water without hesitation and swam upwards. Soon, He-Wan knew what the thing that Ye left in her hand was for. When He-Wan and Kay passed the inverted abyss again, the inverted corpses immediately woke up. They moved quickly towards the two people, waving the chains in their hands, trying to tie them up and become part of the inverted abyss. However, when they approached He-Wan and didn't touch her, a golden light burst out from He-Wan's palm, wrapping her and Kay up. The hanging bodies immediately shrank, and no longer dared to move forward. After He-Wan also discovered this, she immediately raised her palm and pointed it at the hanging body closest to her. At the same time, the body immediately let out a shrill cry and quickly moved away to avoid it. How strange. The transmission of sound in water is completely different from that on land, but He-Wan could still hear the shrill and panicked screams of the corpse so clearly. The next second, the corpses that had just surrounded He-Wan and the other person had already hurriedly dodged away. Judging from the situation, it was easy for them not to get closer. He-Wan and Kay continued to swim upstream. The effect of the hexagram on her palm became more and more obvious. All the corpses in the upside-down abyss avoided them from a distance, and did not get close at all. After the two of them passed the inverted abyss smoothly and quickly, He-Wan looked back again, only to find that the inverted corpses that had just made way for them had returned to their original dense pillar form. When He-Wan and Ye met, Kay's time was stagnant, so Kay didn't know who He-Wan met in that room, nor did he know what happened. After climbing out of the water, he was still mumbling in protest. Too scary. I am most afraid of dead people. They are scarier than human snakes. He-Huan, I tell you, this is the last time. I will never come to this damn place again. He-Huan nodded silently in her heart, and couldn't help but agree. Yes, she didn't want to come to this place again. After returning to Liming City, He-Huan saw many people gathered outside the Parliament Hall before she even walked into her room. He-Huan didn't want to meddle in other people's business, but she didn't have time to leave before she was seen by the sharp-eyed Fu Rong, who immediately dragged her into the Parliament Hall the next second. Then He-Huan knew why so many people gathered here. Because humans and other races have become the same. It is a bit vague to say this, and it is hard to understand. To put it simply, humans lost their original privileges not long ago. The special function of the bracelet has completely disappeared. They can no longer send messages to each other as in the game, and there is no trading platform, and there is no way to check their own attributes. Humans are now the same as other races. This sudden change made all the people in Dawn City panic. They came to find Fu Rong and Tian Maiduo, but these two people could not explain this at all. They asked people to find He-Huan, but He-Huan was not there. Now the message could not be sent, and they could not know the exact location of He-Huan. When they were anxious, He-Huan appeared. Fu Rong immediately pulled He-Huan over and told her all these things. While listening to Fu Rong telling these things, He-Huan was also checking his own situation. It was just as Fu Rong said. She couldn't send messages, couldn't use the business platform, and had no character attributes. However, the size of her backpack didn't change, and she could still use it. In addition, all the professional skills she had learned were still there. She asked when these systems disappeared, and it was exactly when you appeared. In this way, He-Huan understood why this happened. It turned out that, after Ya's soul power returned to its place, not only did her special prompts disappear, but all human systems also disappeared. Fu Rong, what should we do now? He-Huan closed her backpack and looked up at Fu Rong. Fu Rong was also looking at her. In fact, not only Fu Rong was looking at her, but also Tian Maiduo, Fu Yi, and even several high-level human beings were looking at He-Huan. Their faces were full of reluctance and confusion. Then just pretend that these things never existed, He-Huan said. She didn't believe that these people hadn't thought of this approach, but they were unwilling to let these things go away from them unless it was absolutely necessary. After all, with these things, humans and other races with deep roots can fight, but without these, many things actually become passive and inconvenient. He-Huan is their last hope, so they still don't admit this approach, and only hope to hear room for maneuver from He-Huan. Unfortunately, they are destined to be disappointed in He-Huan. Chapter 124. It is impossible for He-Huan to tell anyone about the relationship between him and Ya. However, the people in the Parliament Hall were not disappointed after hearing what He-Huan said. Instead, they felt more at ease, as if the boot had finally dropped. After a few seconds of silence, the Parliament Hall became lively again, but this time it was no longer about the disappearance of the system, but about how to deal with the orcs and trolls outside. Although the orcs and trolls have been keeping their troops outside the Black Forest, how can people sleep peacefully next to the bed? Having so many people there is always a threat. So the production line of thermal weapons is now producing shells and weapons non-stop, but at this time, no matter how much inventory there is, it will feel insufficient. Such a busy day did not last for a few days, and was soon broken. And it was not someone else who broke this piece, but Ming Xiao. He-Huan was watching the first batch of magic cannons coming off the production line on that day. Although all humans lost their systems due to Ya's return, their necessary skills were still retained. The engineers in the military factory led by Fu Rong immediately became busy after they got the formula of the magic cannon from He-Huan. With their improvements and modifications, the first batch of magic cannons were soon offline. These magic cannons not only retain the power of the original magic cannons, but also have the attack power of thermal weapons, and the shells that match them have also been improved, ensuring that the current magic cannons will have unexpected power. Of course, these are still theories, and the engineers of the military factory have not yet tested them. He-Huan stood in the warehouse, looking at the magic cannons carried down from the workshop. She listened to an engineer's introduction, while holding a cannonball in her hand and looking at it carefully. At this time, a guard ran over and said to her, "Boss Ming Xiao Dabanya is back." When He-Huan heard this name, she was slightly stunned, and then quickly looked at the guard who came to report the news, looking at him with an unbelievable look. "Who are you talking about?" "Ming Xiao and Dabanya. They are waiting for you in your mansion." The soldier answered He-Huan seriously. At this moment, He-Huan's mind was in a mess. Ming Xiao and Abanya are an elf and an orc respectively. Because of the restrictions of the curse seal of Dawn City, they cannot get close to Dawn City, so the two of them have been hiding in the Black Forest. They cannot be too far away from Yi-Huan because of the contract. Of course, Yi-Huan also has the task of letting them stay there to monitor the movements of orcs and trolls. Although these two people cannot enter Dawn City, they are very diligent and report the movements of trolls and orcs to Yi-Huan every day. The last time they reported was yesterday evening. At that time, Ming Zhao told Yi-Huan that everything was normal and there was no difference. If nothing has changed, how did Ming Zhao and Abanya come to Dawn City? They can't get close to here. What happened? For a moment, countless thoughts rolled in Yi-Huan's mind. She immediately put down the cannonball in her hand, summoned the flying fox, and immediately rushed towards her mansion. Before approaching the mansion, Yi-Huan saw Ming Zhao and Abanya standing in front of her mansion in midair. After not seeing them for many days, their faces were a little haggard, and their clothes were not very neat. Coupled with the anxious expressions on their faces, Yi-Huan's mind was rolling with those not-so-good ideas that almost came true. Before the flying fox had completely landed, Yi-Huan had already jumped off its back neatly, and Ming Zhao and Abanya also ran towards Yi-Huan quickly. Without waiting for Yi-Huan to speak, Ming Zhao couldn't wait to say, "Yi-Huan, the restrictions on us in Dawn City have disappeared. Just an hour ago, I found out and immediately brought Abanya here. The orcs have also found out, and the trolls have also found out. They seem to be gathering their troops and preparing to attack. I saw the orcs' advanced troops gathering." Big Teeth interrupted immediately after hearing this and said, "Yes, it was my unfilial daughter who led the advanced troops." His words made Yi-Huan's attention stay on him for a while, and Big Teeth immediately scolded Duoli even more vigorously. Big Teeth has been in a state of silence since Duoli put him in the situation of hyena people. Especially to Duoli, he almost kept silent. And today, no one knew what touched Big Teeth. He changed his usual silence, and instead kept complaining about Duoli. It was not difficult to hear that his complaints were more resentful. Yi-Huan gently pushed the glasses stuck on his nose. They were what Yi-Huan got from Lejixi. Because Lejixi was a troll who pursued powerful magic power to the extreme, her body was extremely weak. In order to avoid being killed easily in battle, almost all the props on Lejixi were for her to increase her defense. This pair of glasses was no exception. It was not only able to see the opponent's weaknesses, but more importantly, it could see the opponent's race, and easily see the target's disguise, allowing the wearer to see the target's true appearance. If the big buck teeth seen behind the glasses were not real, Yi-Huan almost thought that the big buck teeth that kept complaining about Duoli were fake. However, in the current situation, if the big buck teeth were fake, it might not be a bad thing. The bad thing is that the big buck teeth are real, his complaints about Duoli are real, and what he said is also true. You know, the rat people are a very cautious race. Under normal circumstances, they will not do risky things, and Duoli is one of the few selfish and profit-seeking rat people. The fact that she was able to take the initiative to walk in front as the vanguard of the joint forces was definitely not because Dolly was crazy, but only meant that the joint forces of orcs and trolls were determined to capture Dawn City. More importantly, Dolly walked in the front and wanted to be the first to rush into the city. She wanted to get more things that belonged to humans. During this time with Kay, Yi-Huan also learned another thing, that is, every time humans were summoned to this world, the process was actually the same. At the beginning, all humans picked up a lot of boxes, and these boxes could open a lot of supplies, and these supplies were all products of the old world, and only humans could open them. These products are not only of great help to humans, but also of great attraction to other races on the desolate continent. There are even special auctions in this world to auction these things. Of course, these boxes with the old world will not always exist. Only when humans gradually integrate into this world, these boxes will gradually disappear, and it will become increasingly difficult for humans to obtain those items from the old times. It is for this reason that every time a summoned human appears in the desolate continent, all races are very keen to buy humans as slaves. In this way, as long as the human dies, his personal belongings will be returned to his owner for free. However, the people in the desolate world never expected that the summoned human this time was not easy to deal with. Not only did they not capture him easily, but they also destroyed the hyena people, and took over the dog-barking city, causing the orcs to suffer a great loss. Therefore, when the orcs and trolls knew that humans had entered Dawn City, they still camped outside the Black Forest even though they knew they could not enter Dawn City. They wanted to surround and kill the humans, and enter the city to plunder as soon as possible. Dolly's initiative just proved the truth of this matter. She confirmed at least two things, which is why Dolly, who is so cautious and value interests, took the lead. First, the orcs were indeed salivating over what humans had. It turned out that there was no production line for hot weapons, and they had not seen the power of these hot weapons. Once they knew about it, I am afraid that it would not only be Dolly who went crazy, but also more races. Second, they confirmed that the curse seal of Dawn City had no effect on them. Although Hee-Hwan herself did not know when it had no effect, she could confirm one thing, that all these changes had started one after Ya's soul power recovered. Hee-Hwan knew that if she wanted to deal with Ya, she would have to deal with the Void, which Hee-Hwan was unwilling to do, because the thing called the Void was the most dangerous thing in her opinion. However, even if humans won the battle against the orcs and trolls this time, what about the future battles? Hee-Hwan knew that the orcs and trolls that surrounded Dawn City this time were not their main force, and they should have a backup plan. Hee-Hwan was an atheist, but she knew that in such a situation, she needed a strong helper, and it was that helper. When the nest is overturned, no egg is left intact. Even if Hee-Hwan could save herself in the battle, if she lost the human race, and could not return to the old world, she would definitely become a target. And a target of the entire desolate continent. Hee-Hwan didn't want this to happen, so whether Hee-Hwan was willing or not, she had to go see Ya again. Seeing that Hee-Hwan didn't reply to his mumbling, Big Teeth felt uneasy, and his voice gradually lowered. His eyes rolled and he asked, "Boss He, can you guarantee that I can survive under Dooley's hands?" Hee-Hwan looked at Big Teeth and suddenly laughed. "That depends on how well you know your daughter." Chapter 125. Hee-Hwan didn't know whether Big Teeth knew Dooley or not, but when Hee-Hwan saw Dooley from the high city wall, she felt like she was standing in the square of Broken Rock Town again. The scene of that night appeared in front of her again. In front of her was a huge army of orcs, not only rat men, but also mole men, and several small orcs around Broken Rock Town. Their types looked very complicated, but they had a common feature. That is, they all wore purple robes. Hee-Hwan had no prejudice against all colors, but after arriving in Shattered Rock Town, she became particularly sensitive to the color purple. She used a telescope to look at the seemingly huge team and easily found Dooley at the front of the team. Compared to the last time she saw her, Dooley looked more proud and confident at this time. She seemed to have transformed into a true queen. Especially when she made a light gesture and saw the huge army all react in unison, Hee-Hwan felt that this rat woman was not a simple person. At least, she was much stronger and smarter than Black Hand. Of course, this was not what Hee-Hwan noticed most about Dooley. What Hee-Hwan cared about most was that Dooley was also wearing armor, but this armor was purple. Not only was the clothes purple, Hee-Hwan also found that Dooley's eyes had completely turned purple. Under the sunlight, there were afterimages like flames moving around these purple eyes. All these things were piled together, and Hee-Hwan didn't need to think at all to conclude that these small orcs were probably all connected to the Void. Perhaps, there were more than these small orcs, and the other orcs and trolls, who were eager to try behind them, were also like this. The battle started in this tense situation. In this place, there is no saying that the first shot will not be fired. The human side did not give Dolly's troops a chance to line up. When they were still in chaos, they had already opened the magic cannon. During the day, the power of the Void was not that strong. With the help of thermal weapons, humans did not waste any effort in fighting these small orcs. It took almost no time to see the small orcs being beaten into a mess. They fled everywhere, and even Dolly's shouting had no effect. The same situation was applied to other orcs and trolls. Unfortunately, the advantage of humans did not last long, because soon night came. Without waiting until the dead of night, at just 10 o'clock in the evening, the humans of Dawn City discovered the orcs and trolls besieging outside, and their strength began to grow stronger. The battle began to become a little difficult, but fortunately, many troops had been eliminated in the daytime battle, so even if it seemed a little difficult to act now, it was not impossible to defeat them. The real beginning that made everyone feel headache was that in the dead of night, the strength of the orcs and trolls seemed to increase to a point that they could not deal with in an instant. Ordinary arrowheads can no longer hurt them. Only hot weapons can be used to deal with them, but hot weapons are not in constant supply. Now the production lines of humans are running at full speed, but even so, they can only barely supply them. If the war situation intensifies and continues, I am afraid that they will not be able to supply them. Moreover, there is the problem of raw materials. Although Hee-Hwan has given Fu Rong a considerable amount of raw materials, it is unknown whether these raw materials can hold up, and how long they can hold up. In addition, there is another thing that makes the people of Dawn City feel extremely dangerous. That is, they found that after entering the silent night, some things in the night began to materialize. Originally, they were hidden in the dark night, but now, they crawled out and surrounded Dawn City with their fangs and claws. If they just increased the strength of orcs and trolls, or follow them to fight against humans, it would be nothing. What really makes He-Huan feel that they can't be left alone is that these things that have become physical, although they are still afraid of the protective shield of Dawn City, they are numerous and surround the protective shield little by little. It seemed that it would not take long before the protective shield was damaged a little bit by their encirclement and corrosion. Although the speed was not very fast, the number of these things was too large. Even if a large part of them died under the holy light of the protective shield, they would be replenished from the darkness in a very short time. It went on, endlessly. This couldn't go on. He-Huan had never been so aware of this matter as she was now. She put down the telescope and turned to walk down the city wall. After Fu Yi killed a void monster in the target, he hurriedly shouted to He-Huan's back, "He-Huan!" He-Huan looked back at Fu Yi. Fu Yi asked, "Where are you going?" He-Huan didn't know how to explain to Fu Yi where she was going, so she could only say, "I go get some things ready." Fu Yi always believed in what He-Huan said, but for some reason, this time, when he looked at He-Huan and her lonely figure in the dark, Fu Yi felt an uneasy feeling in his heart for no reason. So he asked again, "Really? Where are you going?" He-Huan did not continue to answer Fu Yi's question, but a comforting smile appeared on her face. She waved to Fu Yi. "Don't worry, I will be back soon." Fu Yi did not get the answer he wanted. In fact, he did not know what kind of master he wanted, but looking at He-Huan's confident smile, he seemed to be relieved. He swallowed a big mouthful of saliva, trying to suppress the anxiety in his heart. Maybe, just as He-Huan said, she will be back soon. Fu Yi could only say, "Be careful." He-Huan also replied, "You too, you must be careful." Her eyes seemed particularly bright in the dark night, carrying the hope of survival. He-Huan walked down from the high city wall quickly. Behind her was the deafening sound of fighting, but as she got closer to the cathedral, the sound became weaker and weaker. When He-Huan stood under the cathedral, the fierce fighting sound seemed to have completely become a background board. The crisp sound of her stepping on the dry vine branches seemed even more terrifying in the silent night. Just before entering the cathedral, He-Huan suddenly heard someone whispering in her ear. "This is your fate, you can't escape it, come, I need you." He-Huan had only heard this voice twice, but it was engraved in the depths of her memory. Even if it turned into ashes, she thought she would remember it clearly. It was the void. He-Huan turned back, trying to find the existence of the void in the dark sky. Unfortunately, under the protection of Ya's powerful divine power, these things could not penetrate the protective shield. When He-Huan looked over, she only saw branches swaying in the night wind. She did not stop and quickly went to where Ya was. It was still the same small house, still dry and warm, although the furnishings inside had changed a little. The only thing that remained unchanged was the huge, strange pattern in the middle of the house. He-Huan noticed that there was actually a smaller, complex circular pattern below the center of this pattern. The last time she came, she didn't see the small circle below because the large pattern above was too eye-catching. And now, He-Huan noticed this pattern not because she had sharp eyes, but because she found that this small circular pattern was glowing. The color of the light was also very familiar to her, and she was very afraid of it. It was purple. Ya stood next to this huge pattern, and he looked no better than the last time they met. Although still a physical body, He-Huan still found that the light on him that made people feel warm and safe had dimmed a little. He stood there with his hands open. In front of him was a golden hexagram floating above the huge seal. The light on the hexagram kept pressing towards the glowing purple circle under the seal pattern. Although it was silent, He-Huan could tell at a glance that this was a confrontation. It was a confrontation between Ya's divine power and another kind of power. If He-Huan guessed correctly, this kind of power should be the void. Now it seems that Ya's power has the upper hand. He-Huan recalled the small battle in Dawn City, and couldn't help but smile bitterly. When Ya's power still had the upper hand, humans and Dawn City were fighting like this. He-Huan took a deep breath. She didn't want to be so pessimistic, but the facts were teaching her how to be a human being. If Ya is the patron saint of Dawn City and humans, then when his power is completely exhausted, will both Dawn City and humans be destroyed and swallowed up? Just as He-Huan was staring at Ya in the room, she suddenly heard Ya's voice ringing in her ears. "You're here?" He-Huan looked in the direction he was speaking, and saw only a shadow of Ya standing beside her, and behind him, Ya's real body was still fighting against the purple circle on the ground. Ya said again, "I thought you would be back for some time." Chapter 126. He-Huan smiled bitterly. She wanted to never come again, but that was impossible, wasn't it? Fortunately, Ya didn't continue to dwell on this issue in a meaningless way, and he turned to the topic that he cared about the most. "When do you plan to leave?" He-Huan pulled the corner of his mouth. How do you know that if I agree to your request, I will go to that damn void? Ye glanced at He-Huan with his golden eyes, and the shadow had already walked in front of the huge seal. You must have heard the story of Dawn City. Yes. Then you have to go to the void even more. He-Huan was a little confused. Although she came here to find you just to go to the void, she really didn't want to come here without knowing why. So she asked, why? Do I have to go to the void just because I know the story of Dawn City? Then can everyone who knows the story of Dawn City go to the void? Why must I? He had just looked at He-Huan with a very complicated look. After she finished asking a series of questions, Ye slowly said, because you were dead before you came here, and it was Dawn City that used its power to drag you out of the void. If Dawn City is destroyed by the void, then you will die, and your death will be different from others. Because you were already dead before you came here, so... Ye stopped talking here. He believed that even if he didn't make it clear, He-Huan would understand what he meant. Didn't you say that you chose me? Yes, but first Dawn City chose you who can carry me, and then I chose you, and among these people who were chosen, only you were dead. Although Ye was smiling, that smile was a mask, polite, and unfamiliar, making people feel cold and distant. His mouth opened and closed gently, and the words he said were ruthless. He-Huan, in order to survive, and return to your original world, you have to go to the void. You are saving me, Dawn City, and yourself at the same time. He-Huan's expression did not change much. She has always been a stable person. No matter what others say, or what they add to her, it will not affect He-Huan's decision. She was just wondering, since I'm here, it means I've agreed to go to the void. Why are you saying this? If it were someone else, they would probably not continue to move forward. Do you understand? Ye's smile seemed to have a little more human touch. I understand, but there are some things I want to make clear before you enter the void. Why? For the truth. He-Huan was even more confused. What truth? Before Ye's shadow could answer the question He-Huan wanted to know the most, she saw that the light of the purple circle under the seal suddenly became brighter, as if it was going to push away the holy light of the hexagram. Although the next second, Ye's entity controlled the holy light in his hand, and it became stronger again, suppressing the purple light in the void again, but because of this game, He-Huan noticed that Ye's entity was a little weaker, and the golden holy light lingering on his body was visibly fainter. Ye probably can't hold on for much longer. Go. The expression of the shadow was still very indifferent and distant. Behind him, as he spoke, the air suddenly cracked, revealing the purple and black space inside. He-Huan took a last look at Ye's shadow, and his increasingly weak body, and then walked into the crack. However, at the moment when the crack behind him was about to close, He-Huan heard Ye's voice again. Call my name. When you are in the most dangerous time, you can call my name. You have 3 chances, and I will come to help you. He-Huan didn't even have time to answer him. The crack behind her had closed. The light in front of her eyes dimmed all of a sudden, and there was silence all around. Before entering the void, He-Huan had encountered the void twice, but the results of each encounter were not very pleasant, so that in He-Huan's consciousness, all cognitions of the void were stereotyped. Darkness, fear, coldness, loneliness. There must be indescribable monsters everywhere, devouring and dying everywhere. However, when he really stood here, He-Huan found that none of the things he imagined happened. She looked around, trying to see where she was, but there was nothing. It was dark and quiet everywhere. There was no danger, and there was no voice that kept talking. It was as if she had suddenly entered a completely sealed box. While looking around, He-Huan's footsteps moved, and it was not until this time that she realized that she seemed to be standing on a quiet water surface. The clear and slightly cool water flowed on her feet as she walked, allowing her to clearly judge where she was. He-Huan felt a little cold. She took out a red dress from her backpack and put it on. This was not an ordinary red dress. It was the leather of the corpse of the red dragon. Chung Huanchun used the master skinning technique to completely peel off the skin of the red dragon, and used the skin to make a piece of clothing for He-Huan, which was the one He-Huan just put on. The skin of the red dragon can well isolate the coldness from the void, and the texture is strong and hard, which is an excellent defensive equipment. After He-Huan put on the coat made of dragon skin, she not only felt the coldness disappear immediately, but was even surprised to find that the scene in front of her eyes suddenly changed. When she put on her clothes with her eyes down, it was still pitch black, but when she raised her eyes, she saw her home. This was not her refuge in the dark world, but her home in the old times. She spent a lot of money to build her home, and there was a French window in front of her, and there was excellent sunlight outside the window. There were clouds that looked like soft cotton in the blue sky, and from time to time, birds could be seen flying through the clouds, chirping as they passed by her window. He-Wan also noticed that in the wheat field outside the window, a young man walked past, then stepped back and waved at He-Wan vigorously, with a smile as bright as the sunshine outside the window on his face. He-Wan recognized that this young man was the child of her neighbor. Although they were neighbors, the nearest family was several hundred meters away from her house. Such a long distance did not stop the young man's enthusiasm. This child never cared about her indifference, and often sent her some things. Freshly picked fruits, wild flowers with dew, or just caught gray hairs. Although He-Wan would reject him mercilessly every time, the next time he saw him, the young man would still greet him so enthusiastically. In fact, He-Wan had never remembered the name of this young man, and even this person was very faint in his memory. However, He-Wan didn't know why he met him in this place. She couldn't control her legs and walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the young man carefully through the window. The boy probably noticed He-Wan's reaction, and ran towards her window excitedly. He-Wan knew in her heart that something was wrong, but she couldn't control the strange expectation rising in her heart. The boy was getting closer and closer to He-Wan's window, and He-Wan's body began to tense up. She kept telling herself to be on guard, but she couldn't control herself. In this situation, even if He-Wan was so passive, she knew that she had entered the trap of the void. She gently clenched her hand hanging by her side, and a dagger appeared in her palm. The power of the void is very strong, but He-Wan firmly believes that no matter how strong something is, it will eventually slacken. She only needs to wait quietly for the arrival of that reality. Just when the boy's hand was about to touch the glass, He-Wan was ready to go. But at this moment, a quick sound similar to a whistle rushed out from behind He-Wan, and the loud sound scared He-Wan. She almost instinctively turned around to see what the sound was. It was when she turned around that He-Wan found that her body was actually controlled by herself again. She found that it was not a whistle, but the water in the kitchen was boiling, and the kettle made a whoo sound, which was very sharp. He-Wan took a deep breath and thought of the boy again. She looked back out the window, and could not help but stand there in a daze. There was no window outside, and there was no house at home. The place where she was began to shake. He-Wan's eyes were looking out from a narrow opening, and all she could see was a dazzling white light. It's hot. It's like being roasted in the polar regions, even a little suffocating, and the air is filled with a thirsty and choking smell. Before He-Wan could react to where she was, someone suddenly bumped into her shoulder, and she looked immediately. What caught her eye was a rough and handsome face. His skin was slightly dark, and when he smiled, there were light lines under his eyes, and his eyes were filled with deep friendship. 42. Now that this mission is over, are you going to retire? Congratulations. 42. He-Wan was a little dazed, and it took him 2 seconds to react. Isn't this the code name he used when he was a mercenary? The young man in front of him is 77. They worked together, and were partners for a while, from fighting to sleeping together. This is a passionate man, and He-Wan really reminisced about it. However, this is not the point. The point is, he is dead. He has been dead for 3 years. Chapter 127. There was endless affection in Kashiki's eyes, and a slightly ruffian smile on his lips. He-Wan could even feel his hot breath on her body. He-Wan did not feel nostalgic, but felt that emptiness was really not a good thing, especially attacking people's happiest memories. She calmly stared at Kashiki's eyes that seemed full of friendship, and could not help but taunt him lightly. Kashiki, what are you congratulating me for? After 15 years, you finally get the freedom and peace you longed for. Isn't it worth looking forward to? 42. I have been waiting for you. We can be together without any scruples. 77 said, as he reached out and held He-Wan's hand. His palm was broad and thick, with a man's unique hot body temperature, which seemed to burn He-Wan's calmness. His eyes looked at He-Wan so deeply, as if she was imprinted in his heart. If it were another woman, she would probably be addicted to these affectionate eyes. His voice was low and whispered, 42, I miss you very much. Can we be together forever? The coldness and calmness on He-Wan's face finally broke at this moment, and she sneered without disguising, have you forgotten, 77, how did you die? In He-Wan's voice, 77's affectionate expression seemed to be stunned. He looked at He-Wan blankly and helplessly, as if he didn't understand what He-Wan meant at all. He-Wan became more and more certain of one thing, that is, the void can search people's memories, especially for those things that can create beautiful memories for people. The void can dig them out, and then infinitely magnify this beauty to confuse people's hearts. Whether it's the warm house or 77, it's all like this. I just don't know if the void can read all the memories. I guess it can't. If it can, it probably won't know what's behind these seemingly beautiful memories. He Huan's hand easily broke free from 77's palm. She stood up and pinched 77's face with her backhand, mocking coldly, "Have you forgotten how you died?" 77 blinked. "I'm not dead. 42, I have been here. I have been waiting for you." "Ha!" This time even He Huan couldn't help it. She laughed with deep disdain. 77, you died in my bed. I killed you with my own hands. And the reason is because of you, remember? 77's expression became stunned. It seemed that it had no idea what He Huan said. He Huan stared at 77's face, and cold words popped out of her mouth word by word. "You took the money you shouldn't have taken and tried to kill me." He Huan suddenly laughed out loud, because she found that Kashiki's face was twisted again and again in front of her eyes, which looked really interesting. "Kashiki, you died because of betraying me. When you died, you gnashed your teeth at me. Wait for me." "Ha, wait for nothing." As He Huan finished the last word, Kashiki's face finally disappeared, leaving only a black and purple sticky mass, which tried to break free from He Huan's palm. However, He Huan suddenly opened her clenched palm at this moment, and the next second, a dazzling golden light shone from her palm. The void suddenly shook and struggled violently, and in the struggling black mass, He Huan heard the voice of 77 screaming. However, this process was very short, and soon, the black and purple thing disappeared without leaving a trace. He Huan found that his surroundings seemed to be a little brighter. However, she still stood in the middle of an endless body of water, but this time, she could see a shallow road in the water. He Huan hesitated for only a second, and then walked firmly towards the road. There was a small whirlpool every few steps on the road, which was unavoidable and could only be stepped on. But every time she stepped on it, different scenes would appear in front of He Huan's eyes, some of which were from her childhood, and some were places that left a deep impression in her memory. Without exception, every scene that appeared in it was a happiness that could touch people's hearts, and it was a comfort that made He Huan unable to help but stay. However, she never succeeded. He Huan could always find a flaw in these endless happy scenes, and easily pass through this vortex. Every time He Huan escaped from such a vortex, she would find that the surrounding blackness dimmed a little bit, and the road laid out in front of her became clearer. He Huan didn't know how long this road was, how many whirlpools she had stepped on, and how many times she had encountered happiness. She seemed to have stayed in this place for 1, 2, 3 years, or even longer, maybe a lifetime. However, no matter how long life is, it has an end, and the road in front of He Huan seemed to have finally come to an end. In front of He Huan there was a long staircase, and on top of the staircase there was a tall chair. There was a young, handsome man standing next to the chair. When He Huan raised her head, her eyes met the man's, and the man immediately bowed respectfully to her. He said, "I've finally waited for you, my king." He straightened up as he spoke. His skin was white, and against the purple robe, it looked even more bloodless. But his expression was extremely sincere, and his eyes fixed on He Huan, making people feel that they were infinitely respected and admired. It can be said that, standing here at this moment, probably no one can resist such a gaze. He Huan narrowed his eyes. "King." "Yes, my king." As the man spoke, he slowly walked down the high stairs step by step, and in the process of walking, his eyes did not move away, still falling on He Huan with passion. "Why, I am the king." "King, you have already controlled yourself and the world. Whether it is the mountains and valleys, or the tiny dust in this world, they can only exist with your permission." The man said something that seemed to make sense, but when he said it, he lightly snapped his fingers, and a picture appeared in the air. The picture was divided into two halves. One side was the changes in the void after He Huan reacted to each vortex and memory, and the other side was the corresponding changes in the dark night world. Every time He Huan saw himself kill or be knocked down, the situation in the battle in the Dawn City would have different ups and downs. Maybe the orcs had the upper hand, or maybe the humans had the upper hand. However, He Huan found that the people in the battle were dressed differently from when she left. She even saw a few familiar people, such as Fu Rong, Tian Maiduo, Fu Yi, and some engineers and ordinary humans fighting. They seemed old, and they were still trying to find something at the beginning. Faintly, He Huan seemed to hear someone say another name. He Huan. He Huan. He Huan. Who is He Huan? When she heard the name, He Huan was stunned for a moment. She felt that the name was extremely familiar, but she couldn't remember it. The picture finally stopped in a dark night. He Huan saw a bright moon in the sky, and where the moonlight shone, there were hills of different heights. Looking carefully, it was not a hill, but a pile of corpses piled up high or low. A flag that was so tattered that it could not be seen was inserted diagonally on the hills. When the wind blew, The flagpole also swayed and seemed to fall down. Suddenly, a hand held the swaying flagpole, and Yi-Huan saw vicissitudes and old face. Yi-Huan squinted his eyes for a long time, before vaguely recognizing that this person seemed to be Fu Yi. He exhaled, and there was a ball of white mist in the night sky. Behind him were the buildings that had become ruins, and only the huge stones could still show their former glory. Fu Yi suddenly turned around and looked towards the darkness. He uttered a "ha" and bent down to pick up a long knife from the ground, shouting, "Come on! Damn trolls, let's see if you can beat me, your grandpa." There was nothing more. Because at this time, Yi-Huan had walked out of the whirlpool for the last time and stood in front of the high stairs. Those scenes were like memories, and they were as simple as a movie. Finally, they came to an end and disappeared. The handsome and charming face of the man appeared behind the screen. He said, "My king, look, this is your control over the world. If you want them to live, they live. If you want them to die, they can't live." Yi-Huan asked, "Is this person going to die?" She asked about the old man who looked like Fu Yi. She didn't point it out, but she knew that the man in front of her must know what she meant. Sure enough, the man knew it. He shrugged his shoulders. This is something that has not happened yet. Only the king of the world can decide its life and death. As he spoke, the smile on his face became more deceptive. He said to Yi-Huan, "My king, if you want to decide his life or death, it's actually very simple." "Really? How to do it?" Yi-Huan followed the man's words and asked. The man turned around and pointed to the chair on the high stairs. "Just sit on it, and you will be the king." A glimmer of light finally flashed in Yi-Huan's eyes. Chapter 128. The man looked at Yi-Huan with a kind of thoughtful look. Yi-Huan did not move. She seemed to fall into a kind of silence. The man looked at her patiently without urging her, as if everything was under his control. Yi-Huan stood quietly in front of the staircase for a long time. Her expression was calm, and her eyes were empty. It seemed that all her attention was focused on this long staircase. There was nothing else in the world that was worth her attention. After an unknown amount of time, she finally moved again. Yi-Huan walked up the stairs step by step. Each step was very slow and steady, and this steady and slow pace made the man beside her feel a little unhappy for no reason. He had played this trick for hundreds of years, and received many people who came. Without exception, they were all sent by that Ya. But no matter which one came, the result was the same. As long as they heard that as long as they sat on that chair, they could become the king of the world, without exception, they agreed without hesitation. Maybe some people will be more reserved at first, pretending to refuse, but soon they will show a happy expression. When they run to the staircase, no matter whether their steps are brisk or not, the emotion they show must be very happy. Even if a man is not a worm in the stomach of these people, he can feel this kind of happiness. However, the woman in front of him did not convey this kind of happiness at all. Instead, she was very calm as a bottomless deep pool. Any emotion thrown into it would be swallowed up instantly. This made the man feel a little uneasy, but fortunately, Yi-Huan continued to walk up. Although she walked slowly, she never stopped and kept walking towards the chair high up at the top of the stairs. This made the man's anxiety a little more stable. However, Yi-Huan was obviously not a very trustworthy person. With the man's patient smile, Yi-Huan finally stepped onto the top step of the stairs. The tall chair was right in front of her. Now, as long as she walked over and turned around to sit down, everything would be over. However, at this time, Yi-Huan stopped again. And this time, she paused for a longer time. So long that the man couldn't help but remind her, "My king, now there is only one last step. As long as you walk over and sit down, the whole world is yours." Yi-Huan turned her head and looked at the man. There seemed to be a trace of confusion in her calm expression. "As long as you walk over and sit down, the whole world is mine?" The man nodded repeatedly. Yi-Huan asked again, "How many people have you told this?" The man's expression froze a little, but soon became lively again, as if the freezing just now did not exist. He shook his head repeatedly. "No, no, no, my king. I have never told anyone that I have been waiting here for thousands of years, and you are the first person I have seen." The man's expression was so sincere that Yi-Huan felt that he should believe him. If his eyes weren't purple, if his robe wasn't purple, if the smoke that kept flowing out from under his robe wasn't purple when he walked. Yi-Huan laughed. Her smile was very sincere, and she looked like she believed what the man said. She took a step towards the chair in front of her. She was only one step away from the tall chair, and she could sit down as long as she leaned her body. The man's heart couldn't help but hang high with Yi-Huan's movements. The man had received countless humans sent by Ya in the past few hundred years, but this woman was the most special. What was not special was not her attitude towards him, but the fact that this woman bore the mark of Ye. Ye was a god. Although this human guardian god seemed too childish and too weak in the man's eyes, otherwise, he would not have suppressed her for so many years with his little tricks, and she could only live in the form of a ghost. However, no matter how weak he was still a god after all, and as long as he was a god, he would have a god's mark. The power of the god seal is so great that even a man who has been in the void for so long cannot confront it head-on. However, a god has only one god seal. Once the god seal is lost, it means that the god will soon fall. Ye certainly would not give his god seal to this woman named He, but he used the god seal to stamp a mark on this woman. With a mark, it means that this woman can use part of the power of the god seal. Of course, this approach is also quite risky. As long as this woman is dormant under his control, it means that the power of Ye's god seal will also be weakened. For this man, he got a part of Ye's divine seal, so Ye's godhood was already collapsing. He could even take this opportunity to plunder Ye's godhood and possess his divine seal. In this way, for him, his long-cherished wish was fulfilled. He could finally enter this world as a god. When he thought of this possibility, the man felt that his heart could not help but be agitated. He took a deep breath without making a sound, trying to make his expression look calmer. His eyes fell on He, and his eyes were so gentle that they seemed to be filled with water. "My king, what are you waiting for? Your world is waiting for your call. As long as you sit down, all of this is yours. You will have the ability to travel through time and space, and you will be able to save everyone, such as the man you saw at the end. Isn't he waiting for you?" He seemed to be moved by what the man said. She nodded. "Yes, you are right. There are indeed many people waiting for me." Hearing He admit it, the man's smile seemed more sincere and gentle. "Yes, my king." Before he finished speaking, he suddenly heard He say, "Stretch out your hand." The man was slightly stunned. He looked at He in confusion. He didn't understand why this woman didn't sit down quickly and accept the power of breaking the sky and let him stretch out her hand. And He's eyebrows were raised. She looked at the man with undisguised sarcasm in her voice. "What? You said I was the king, but you were lying to me." "No, you are my king." "Then why don't you lend me a hand?" The man paused for a few seconds, and soon the discomfort on his face disappeared, and he stretched out his hand to He. "My king, it is my honor to help you ascend the throne." He looked at the slender and pale hand stretched out from under the robe, smiled slightly, and then grabbed the hand without any hesitation. This woman had the mark of Ye's God on her body. The man knew this all the time, and he knew that he could not easily get close to the mark of God. At least before this woman willingly handed over the mark, he could not get close. Therefore, from the beginning, the man controlled himself very much, not wanting to come into contact with the woman, to avoid touching the divine seal. But the woman asked him to reach out, and the reason was so legitimate and irresistible. It would be a lie for the man to say that he did not hesitate, but he had to do it. Otherwise, what if the woman did not sit down? Wouldn't it be a waste of the trap he had set up for so long? And the man's eyes quickly circled around He's body. He felt that He should not know his plan. No, she definitely didn't know, just like those humans before. Otherwise, she would not be standing here. Then she couldn't use the divine seal on herself. The man thought quickly in his heart before he stretched out his hand. He bent his waist slightly, and the whole person seemed very humble. Even his expression became infinite admiration for He. If it were someone else, he would definitely be deceived by such eyes. Unfortunately, the person standing here now was He. She held her hand without hesitation, and the mark in her palm immediately emitted a dazzling light. The man knew he had been fooled almost as soon as the mark glowed. He hurriedly tried to shake off He's hand, but her hand held the man tightly like an iron clamp. An unspeakable severe pain suddenly burned from He's palm to his own hand. It was not an ordinary pain, it was the pain of being burned by the divine seal. The purity of the divine seal is supreme, and it will mercilessly strike anything that wants to touch itself. This blow went from his hand to the depths of his soul. A thin layer of cold sweat immediately appeared on the man's face, but he didn't dare to show it too exaggeratedly, for fear that He would see something at this critical moment. So, with a forehead full of sweat, he showed a bleak smile to He. "Master, please sit down." He also shouted when he opened his mouth, "Yeah." The moment he heard this name, the man's face changed immediately, and he looked at He in disbelief. Unfortunately, He's actions were faster. When He started to shout, Ye appeared in front of He, and he stood face to face with He. However, the next moment, He's action surprised both the man and Ye. He pressed Ye's shoulder with his other free hand, and exerted force. He had just been summoned by He Huan, and he had no defense at all. He was pressed by He Huan so hard that he sat down unconsciously. Behind him was the chair that represented rights that the man kept tempting He Huan to sit on. The man's eyes widened suddenly. He couldn't believe what had just happened at this moment. Chapter 129. This is a result that no one had foreseen, at least not Ye and this empty man. The moment Ye sat down, he immediately felt something in his body being sucked out. It even made him unable to control it. Ye knew that this thing was desire. It came from human desire. As a god, he had no desire, but he was the patron saint of mankind. He was born from countless prayers and desires of mankind, but usually these things were suppressed by the huge divinity, and would not appear at all. Now, when Deng Ye sat in this seat, he felt that his desire was about to burst out like a floodgate. He wanted to control it, so he immediately turned the power of the divine seal, and an extremely dazzling golden light burst out from his body. This light instantly swallowed himself and He Huan, and finally even the man in the void was swallowed. The man seemed to have recovered from this shock until this time, and he looked at He Huan with an unbelievable look. He also looked at He Huan, and his face was also full of surprise. He Huan laughed in their shocked eyes without paying attention to anyone else. Under the huge golden light, Su Kong began to feel unhappy. He raised his arms and made a circle. A small purple ball of light immediately emerged from his arms. As time passed quickly, the ball of light became bigger and bigger, gradually pushing out the golden light that enveloped him. Finally, he enveloped himself in the purple light. He also realized the confrontation of the void, and he also began to continue to control his holy light, hoping to fight with the power of the void. The two of them were evenly matched and deadlocked, and He Huan stood between them, standing between the light and darkness. The void finally took off the hypocritical and gentle appearance, and his expression became extremely ferocious. While confronting Ye, he turned his head and stared at He Huan with gritted teeth. "What are you doing?" He Huan put his hands behind his back and took a few steps back. Now she didn't know where she was. There was a vast expanse of emptiness everywhere. In this boundless vast expanse, it seemed that there were only three of them. Even though He Huan took a few steps back, she stepped firmly on the solid body and did not fall down. He Huan did not answer the question of the void immediately, but turned to look at Ye on the side. Although Ye did not speak, his expression was the same as that of the void. He also found it incomprehensible that He Huan would summon him at this time and press him on the chair of desire. He Huan laughed. "One of you is the patron saint of mankind, and the other is the master of the void, right? You are the master of the void, right?" When He Huan said this, she realized that she was just guessing about the identity of this man in the void. Although she felt that she did not guess, she did not get the confirmation of this man. The man did not speak, but he did not deny it. He Huan nodded. "That means I am right. You are the master of the void. Both of you actually have strong strength. Logically speaking, a small mortal like me really has no strength and opportunity to compete with you. People like us are just flags that you can easily pick up when you are maneuvering. One of you wants to enter the world and become the master of the world, and the other wants to regain the glory of the past. To me, a human, it's a fight between gods. It has nothing to do with me. Even if it does, I can't do anything about it. It's a pity that you both went too far. One wants to use humans to exhaust the other's divine power, and the other wants to find the weakness of the void through humans." At this point, He Huan seemed to remember something, snorted coldly, and showed an undisguised disdain. "What? Do you think that we, as chess pieces, cannot have our own emotions, and can only be manipulated by you? I don't know about others, but I am not like that," He Huan said, as she slowly moved between the two people, her eyes moving back and forth emotionlessly between the two people who were competing with each other. Finally, she stopped. "You don't understand me." When she said this, she couldn't help laughing out loud. "No, it should be said that for you, you won't try to understand me, because in your eyes, it doesn't matter whether I am good or bad, as long as I can help you get things done. God, you are so proud. You probably don't know that I hate trouble the most, and I hate others taking advantage of me the most." He Huan raised his hand and gently pointed at the two people with his slender fingers. "Neither you nor you have ever considered the thoughts and inner thoughts of humans. You think it is not worth mentioning. Then today," He Huan pointed at himself again, "I, a human, also want to express my own thoughts." He Huan's words made the two people focus their attention on her after the confrontation, and they couldn't help but ask in unison, "What's the idea?" He Huan spread his hands and indicated their current actions. "That's it. Isn't it better for you to solve the problem between you? I won't be a middleman." I don't know what He Huan said. At this time, Ye and Shukong showed a look of horror on their faces. "You can't do this. Ye spoke first, trying to persuade He Huan. If we let this go on, the world will be swallowed by the void. What will be the consequences? He Huan just raised his eyebrows. Don't you have confidence in your own strength? The void laughed. Yes, yes, that's right. If I occupy the world, there is nothing wrong with it. Human, I will definitely make you my first sacrifice. What do you think? I don't think so. He Huan smiled at the void. After saying the proud words, he immediately got a response from Ye. The holy light burst out even more, as if it was going to overwhelm the void again. Shukong didn't have time to continue talking to Ye Huan. He looked down on Ye, a downtrodden god, but no matter how downtrodden he was still a god. He had the divine seal, which was what Shukong wanted but couldn't compete with. Now the light in the divine seal was so bright that Shukong had to cheer up and face Ye. He Huan looked at this picture, and knew that the confrontation between them would not end in a short time. Maybe one day, maybe 1 year, maybe many years. In short, as a human being, He Huan did not want to be led by the nose by these gods any longer. She looked at the two people in confrontation quietly and said, There is a saying in my world, that is, no matter what you need to fight for it yourself, and it is useless to rely on others. Now I pass this saying to you, and I hope you can all work hard for what you want. As she said this, He Huan took out a round metal ball from her arms. Shukong was the first to notice her action, and he suddenly asked in a stern voice, What are you going to do? He Huan waved the thing in her hand. It was a space locator that Kay had given to He Huan. When she left Dawn City, she had set the location of this thing on the city wall. Now, as long as it was activated, she could be dragged back. Of course, she didn't know whether this space locator would work for the current time and space. I don't want to be a pawn for you, nor do I want to be a referee for you. I want to leave here, He Huan said seriously. Think about it carefully. This is not a casual place. You can't leave here just by your own ability. At this time, Ye also shed his gentle and kind appearance, revealing the coldness of God. Really? If you leave here, you will enter an unknown area if you are not careful. No one knows what is there, and what the result will be. The corners of Ye's mouth were tightly tightened. Every word he said seemed to be squeezed out from the corners of his mouth that were flattened, and it sounded like a strong warning. Are you threatening me? He Huan was not angry, but looked at Ye with a very calm expression. This is actually useless. You have to know that your threats and warnings will only work when the chess piece is willing to be a chess piece. When the chess piece decides not to do it, all your threats and promises will be in vain. He Huan threw the thing in his hand up and down. Are you trying to use death to warn me? But what I am least afraid of in this life is death. But what I hate most in this life is being held hostage, being ruled, and having no choice. The small metal ball fell into He Huan's palm, making a click sound, revealing a round button. She looked coldly at the confrontation between Su Kong and Ye. Don't try to control anyone's fate proudly, otherwise, pride will devour you. When He Huan finished the last word, she disappeared in this space, leaving only the space locator falling to the ground and smashing into pieces. Ye raised his head and looked at Su Kong, who had been competing with him. Su Kong was also looking at him. He pulled the corner of his mouth and laughed. Look, the quality of the humans you chose is really worse than one. Ye just sneered. He and the Void had fought countless times, but as He Huan said, every time they fought, they had gone through humans, and they had never fought face to face like this. This time, it was probably the first and last time. Ye suddenly smiled. He had been the protector of humans for so many years, and always thought he was extremely powerful, but in the end, he had to be taught a lesson by a small human. He Huan, you really are. However, He Huan, who was already carried by the space locator, did not know all this. When she summoned Ye to the void, she actually had the idea of letting it go if she couldn't survive. However, it was a sudden force that woke her up. He Huan's body reacted faster than her brain, and she grabbed the force that was attacking her. When she looked closely, it was actually Kay. He cursed, This is a war, why are you in a daze? It was not until this time that He Huan felt that her hearing, vision, smell, and all her senses had returned to her. Her eyes quickly scanned the surrounding environment, and found that this was a battlefield. She stood on the city wall, and heard the whistling wind, and the noisy fighting. The air was filled with the dry and pungent smell of gunpowder, and the smell of blood blown to pieces by the wind. He Huan was a little confused about where she was, and what happened. Did she seem to have escaped from somewhere? But unfortunately, He Huan's mind was blank now. She seemed to have forgotten something very important. The surrounding environment did not give He Huan a chance to be dazed. A strong wind seemed to be rushing towards her. He Huan subconsciously lay on the ground. Not only Kay, but also Tian Maiduo, Fu Yi and Ming Zhao lay on the ground with her. Each of them had scars of varying sizes, and their eyes were bloodshot, showing that they had endured a long time. Is it a little weaker? Suddenly, the voice of Big Fong sounded from the corner. Then more discussions came out of their mouths, little by little. No way, how could it suddenly become weaker? Ming Zhao still didn't quite believe it. Fu Yi reached out and wiped the blood on his forehead, which was flowing out of the scabby wound. He said, yes, a little bit. Since they started to release the purple void shell yesterday, I have been able to smell a strange smell, but now this smell seems a little lighter. Yesterday, the smell of the void has faded? He Huan was very sharp and caught the words Fu Yi said. Before she could ask, Tian Maiduo's voice rang again. How many supplies and shells are left? How many turrets can we use? The next batch of supplies will be coming up soon. There are still 17 or 18 turrets that can be used. If their firepower is still so strong, I guess we can't hold on for long. But if they run out of void shells, we can suppress them. He Huan. After Tian Maiduo had an idea of the current battle situation, he once again focused on He Huan and gently called He Huan's name. He Huan also slowly looked up at him. There was a little confusion in her eyes. She felt that she should be very familiar with the current situation, but she forgot what happened. It was just that when Tian Maiduo called her, her attention was subconsciously focused on him. Tian Maiduo asked softly, "Did you go there?" He Huan was getting more and more confused. Where did she go? However, Tian Maiduo's eyes were too sincere, so sincere that He Huan didn't know how to respond at all. So, she could only honestly respond to her confusion, where? This time, it was Tian Maiduo's turn to be stunned. He paused for a few seconds until the force of the wind above his head turned into huge arrowheads and shot at the ruins behind them, bursting out with a very strong sound of falling gravel. Until this time, Tian Maiduo asked again, "Have you seen the void?" A lot of things suddenly popped into He Huan's mind until this time, allowing her to gradually see some things from the completely confused state. She seemed to remember something. In that endless space, she saw the past, the future, and the void. Not only the void, but also the human god, yeah. What did you do? Tian Maiduo asked again. He Huan blinked yes. What did she do? She seemed to have done something that neither Shukong nor Ye had expected. She brought the two of them together. Since both parties had opinions about each other, they should solve the problem face to face. This is the choice that adults should make when facing difficulties, instead of constantly making things difficult for her, a human being, or for many humans. What's the point of making things difficult for a human being? At least He Huan thought this matter was meaningless. Gradually, the images and details in He Huan's mind became clearer and clearer, and she finally laughed out loud. I'm not dead, right? The people around her looked at her in surprise, but they still answered her. Not dead, you are alive and well. He Huan jumped up suddenly. She looked down at the city wall, only to see that the purple robe in her memory had completely faded, and especially dually, her eyes, which were originally purple, gradually turned blue. At this moment, Duoli did not notice that He Huan was looking at her on the city wall. She seemed to be completely in another kind of panic. Duoli only spread her hands and looked at the empty palms with a look of disbelief, as if something had disappeared there. He Huan had some guesses in his heart, but he was still unsure, so he quickly looked up and looked into the distance. What was imprinted in her eyes was the gradually fading purple. Almost all the refractions visible to the naked eye faded like the seawater. As the purple faded, everything left seemed to have changed. No longer majestic and confident, they all seemed to be in a panic. He Huan also noticed that the most eye-catching huge engineering vehicles in front of the battle also began to collapse as the purple faded. What happened to them? Kay was holding the wall and seemed to have discovered all this. He asked curiously. He Huan did not answer him, but Fu Yi, Tian Maiduo and others could not help but show strange surprise on their faces. Tian Maiduo looked at He Huan, and he was shocked and couldn't believe it. He Huan also looked at him, and suddenly raised his eyebrows. Why don't you attack? What are you waiting for? This was obviously just a very plain sentence, but at this moment, it became a turning point in the entire battle. Someone sounded the drum of charge. The battle situation that seemed a little decadent just now seemed to have become an illusion. Countless hot weapons and arrowheads fell like raindrops on the fleeing orcs and trolls. In the city of Dawn, someone shouted charge. Immediately, countless humans emerged from Dawn City, rushing towards the defeated coalition forces. The hall of Dawn City was filled with passionate singing, accompanied by the aroma of fine wine, which seemed to intoxicate the dark night of victory. He Huan fought on the city wall, quietly looking at the crescent moon with his eyes narrowed. Don't you regret your choice? A figure seemed to disappear beside He Huan, semi-transparent, with a flat voice, and it was impossible to tell what emotion it was. He Huan couldn't tell whether this person was Ye or Shukong, but she didn't care who it was. No regrets, He Huan said firmly again. You obviously had the opportunity to become a king, or return to the world you wanted to return to the most, but now there is nothing. The man's voice was clear and dark, and it seemed that it was not very clear. He Huan narrowed her eyes, and seemed to be thinking about this question seriously, but soon she shook her head again. I don't regret it. Are you so sure that your current choice is right? How do you know that your current choice is not a death sentence? How can you be sure that everything now is just a fantasy of yours? The figure seemed very dissatisfied with He Huan's calmness, and he kept asking. So what if it's just a fantasy? He Huan suddenly asked him back. The man was stunned for a moment, but immediately replied, Fantasy means it's fake, which means your final ending is a tragedy. Do you like tragedy? How do you know that fantasy is fake? He Huan asked back. This question seemed particularly incredible and naive, and it stumped the other party. However, He Huan did not need him to really answer this question. In He Huan's heart, he had another answer. Only if I live every day seriously, then this is real. What is the ending? Is it death? Death is just a state that happens in an instant. It can happen at any time. For me, what is more important is everything that is happening now, not the moment it will happen. Do you want to know why I made this choice? He Huan asked. The other party nodded silently. Because I want to live for myself. In that old era, I always lived for myself. I did everything not for kindness or peace, but just for myself. I want to go back to that era. In fact, I also want to get rid of the control of the rules here. He Huan took a deep breath and looked at the shadow seriously. She thought she would only say this once. And now, when I have the opportunity to get rid of the constraints of the rules, I don't mind staying here or in the original era. And you must also understand that human beings are not pawns manipulated by your pride. We must be loyal to ourselves and to the present. So, I don't regret it, because I made a choice for myself. The figure remained silent, and disappeared like the wind blowing through the night sky. Fu Rong shouted behind him, He Huan, come and have a drink. He Huan looked back, and felt that the heaviness that had been constraining her seemed to disappear without a trace at this moment. She smiled and walked over. Okay. Chapter 130 Postscript. 10 years before the wasteland. Dawn City returned to human hands again, and was rebuilt under the leadership of the human parliament. Humans from the wasteland began to flee to Dawn City, and Dawn City awakened. Humans accepted the surrender of dwarves and rat men, and gave them enough land and respect, collectively known as the Eastern Alliance. 8 years before the wasteland. The Eastern Alliance was invaded by the orcs, and the war was reignited. 7 years before the wasteland. The trolls joined the orcs. 6 years before the wasteland. The elves joined the orc coalition. In the same year, the dragons joined the orc coalition. 2 years before the wasteland. The elves and dragons withdrew from the war, declared neutrality, and recognized humans as a legal race in the wasteland. 1 year before the wasteland. The trolls were beaten to the bottom of the main city by the Eastern Alliance, surrendered, signed a neutrality agreement, and recognized humans as a legal race in the wasteland. In the same year, the orcs surrendered, signed a non-aggression treaty with the Eastern Alliance, withdrew from the free land, and lived in the extremely cold continent. In the same year, humans, elves, trolls, and dragons recognized orcs as the legal race of the desolate continent. The first year of the desolate era. All races on the desolate continent jointly signed a peace treaty. The 10th year of the desolate era. Dawn City once again became the most rumored pearl on the desolate continent, and all races came to pay homage. The 41st year of the desolate era. He Huan, the highest general of the human race, passed away. Fu Rong put down the pen in her hand and exhaled a long breath. In the cold night, she raised her old face and looked at the moon outside the window, which was still a crescent moon. Another old friend has left. I don't know who will leave me in the end. The corners of Fu Rong's eyes are already filled with dense wrinkles of time. She seems to remember the night of the counterattack, which seemed to be a crescent moon. What is she doing? Oh, she seems to be calling He Huan to come over for a drink. He Huan walked towards her with a smile, and she asked with a smile, What are you looking at outside by yourself? He Huan laughed so hard that his eyes could not be seen. She said, It depends on fate.